Hey guys, tonight we're slipping beneath scratchy wool blankets back through time into the murky glow of a single beeswax candle. It's cold, the hearth's gone dim, and someone's probably coughing in the next room, but don't worry, that's just how it was. We're entering the medieval night, where sleep didn't come easy or all at once, and where you probably won't survive this, especially if you're used to memory foam and silence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, what city are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Midnight? 3 AM? I won't judge. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the centre of a small medieval dwelling, lit by just one flickering candle. The fire in the hearth has burned down to red coals, giving off more shadows than light. The walls are timber and wattle, patched with whatever kept the cold out. Wool scraps, clay, maybe some hay jammed into the cracks. There's no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters you hope will hold against the wind. Everything smells faintly of smoke, damp wood, and the people who live here. Yeah, it's intimate. And this is your life now. A world without light switches. A world where darkness rules more hours than you can really use. Once the sun goes down, you don't get much choice. You slow down, wind down, shut down. Not because you're relaxed or enlightened or any of that nonsense. It's just because candles are expensive. Firewood doesn't grow on trees. Well, it does, but you're not allowed to cut those ones down without your lord's permission. So when twilight hits, you and everyone else fall into what's called the candlelight hour. It's that brief stretch of time after the sun's gone, but before you actually lie down. 1 or 2 candles burn, but only if you can afford them, and you sit, or pray, or stitch a little, or just stare at the fire. Everything is slower, quieter, time thickens like cold gravy. You're not exactly asleep, but you're not really awake anymore either. Here's something weird. A lot of people didn't go straight to bed when it got dark. The idea of staying up just long enough to do some chores, talk a little, maybe snuff the candle and sit in total darkness for a while, that was normal. In fact, that one candle, it might not even be for you. In many homes, the head of the household, or the local priest or steward, would control the lighting. You'd better be done with whatever you're doing before they take it away. And no, you don't have your own room to retreat to. Bedrooms, as a concept, aren't a thing yet for most people. You'll be lucky to have your own corner. Sleeping is something that happens communally. Family members sleep together, sometimes with neighbours, definitely with servants, maybe with animals. You'll learn to live with it. Now here's a quirky little detail. Medieval people actually feared the dark, but they also respected it. They believed it was a time when boundaries between worlds got a little thinner. You could hear voices, see things in the corners of your eyes. The candlelight hour wasn't just sleepy, it was spooky. That's why prayers were mumbled during this time, charms whispered to protect against spirits, demons, or even fairies. That flickering candle wasn't just for light, it was for protection. You settle into your spot, a low wooden frame piled with straw and a mostly clean blanket. Maybe you're lucky and get a sheepskin to lay over it, maybe not. Either way, you're not lying flat. That's considered dangerous. Lying completely horizontal was associated with death, so most people sleep in a sort of reclining position, half upright, like you're always waiting for someone to come knock, which in fairness could happen. People visit each other at weird hours. You'll get used to it. And this might surprise you, but there's actually a scholarly debate still simmering about how common artificial light was at night. Some historians argue that wealthier households lit up the evening pretty well, with rushlights and oil lamps. Others say that's wishful thinking, and even the rich preferred to save the good stuff. After all, burning tallow smelled like death, and clean wax wasn't exactly mass-produced. So even in a castle, the candlelight hour might still be pretty dim. Now close your eyes just for a second. Picture yourself nodding off, not in silence, not in comfort, but surrounded by breathing, snoring, rustling bodies. The fire's crackle has become irregular. The last candle has burned low. Your head tips back against a wall or maybe the crook of your arm. It's not exactly peaceful, but it's familiar. You're not quite asleep yet. You're just in that flickering space between light and dark, between awareness and whatever comes next. And for a moment, in this medieval hush, you understand what it meant to truly fear the night, but also to live in rhythm with it, because soon, very soon, you'll wake again. But that's for the next section. For now, just breathe. Let the flickering light fade. The first sleep comes quickly, more out of exhaustion than peace. You're curled up on a straw-filled mattress that crunches beneath every shift of your hips, with a thin, scratchy blanket pulled up to your chin. Your breath fogs a little in the cold air. It's not freezing exactly, but you'd swear your toes are auditioning for frostbite. Around you, a chorus of snores, wheezes, and the occasional cough bounces softly off the wooden beams. Someone mumbles in their sleep. Someone else lets out a suspiciously long sigh. It's not quiet, but somehow your body gives in. And then you wake up. Not because anything's wrong, not because of a noise, just because that's how people used to sleep. Welcome to the world of first sleep and second sleep, the medieval double feature that no one told you about in health class. Here's how it works. People in the Middle Ages typically slept in two major chunks. The first sleep started shortly after nightfall, usually sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. It lasted for a few hours until around midnight or 1 a.m. Then weirdly, people just woke up. On purpose, not groggily, not irritated, just calmly as if their bodies had pressed pause. They'd spend 1 to 2 hours in this wakeful intermission, then drift off again into their second sleep, which carried them through to dawn. You blink in the darkness. There's no fire left in the hearth now, just faint orange embers. Your eyes are open. You feel weirdly alert, not fully rested, but not groggy either. You sit up slightly, careful not to elbow the child sleeping next to you, or disturb the bundle that might be a small pig. You hear soft movement from the next bedroll. You're not the only one up. During this middle of the night stretch, people weren't just lying there trying to fall back asleep. They got up, they prayed, read if they could. Some even visited neighbours, made love. Others used the time to reflect, think through dreams or problems. Monks used this time to chant. Farmers might check on their animals. If you lived in a town, you might hear someone walking the streets. This wasn't insomnia, this was normal. So why did they do this? No one's totally sure. Some historians think it was just biology, that before artificial light messed with our melatonin levels, the human body was wired to sleep this way. That in deep darkness, the brain naturally splits sleep into halves. Others believe it was cultural, shaped by religion and routine. In some Christian texts from the period, this quiet interlude was described as the perfect time for meditation or prayer. Your soul was closer to God, apparently, when the world was still and half asleep. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some scholars say the first and second sleep thing has been overblown, that maybe it wasn't as universal as we think. The evidence mostly comes from written accounts, which usually reflect the lives of monks, nobles, or the literate elite. Who's to say if peasants working 14-hour days in the fields were interested in waking up at 1 a.m. to recite psalms? Still, there's a lot to back it up. Court records mention crimes committed between first and second sleep. Doctors gave medical advice specifically for that time window. People wrote entire instructions about what to do when you wake up in the middle of the night, like it was expected. Normal, mundane, not at all cause for concern. You shift again, and now you're fully awake. You're not sure what to do. A small lamp flickers in a distant corner. Maybe someone else has lit a taper and is thumbing through a book of prayers, or quietly sewing by the glow. You consider walking outside, but the idea of stepping into the night air without boots is unappealing. Instead, you let your thoughts wander. You notice how sharp your awareness feels. It's quiet now, truly quiet. Most people are still asleep. The ones who are awake keep to themselves. The village is still, except for the occasional owl or the crack of cooling wood. It's not a bad time to exist, really. The dark doesn't feel quite as threatening when you're up and breathing in the middle of it. You wonder what it must have been like to grow up with this sleep pattern. To be told from childhood, don't worry, you'll wake up in the middle of the night, everyone does. Maybe we've pathologized something that was once just part of being human. Maybe our need to sleep 8 uninterrupted hours is a modern anxiety, shaped by shift work, alarms, and productivity guilt. Or maybe not. The truth is, no one knows for sure, but in this moment, you feel oddly at peace. The first sleep did its job. It took the edge off your exhaustion. You feel thoughtful, calm, a little chilled, but mentally awake. And you're not alone. That's the strange comfort here. This weird little middle-of-the-night consciousness is shared. Down the road, in another cottage, another person is probably doing exactly what you're doing, sitting up in bed, staring into the darkness, thinking strange thoughts. Eventually, though, your body starts to pull you back down. The second sleep is coming. This one's deeper, longer, dreamier. It's the one you won't remember much of. Your head settles back onto the bundle of cloth that serves as a pillow. The straw beneath you pokes your shoulder, but you're too tired to care. Someone murmurs again nearby. The wind brushes against the shutters, and just like that, your eyes close. Darkness pulls you under, not all at once, but slowly, like water rising in a well. The second sleep rolls over you like fog, thicker, quieter, and somehow even more detached from time. You're somewhere between conscious thought and dream space, drifting through the kind of sleep that feels stitched into your bones. No alarms, no email dings, no light pollution slicing through the blinds, just the slow, steady breath of those around you, and the groan of timber as the house exhales. But somewhere in the dark, between your first and second sleep, something stirs. A candle flares to life across the room. You barely crack one eye. It's not unusual. In fact, it's kind of expected. The midnight hours were prime time for all sorts of activities in the Middle Ages. People weren't just lying still, trapped under itchy blankets, praying for unconsciousness. They did stuff, and that stuff ranged from the mildly wholesome to the wildly bizarre. You sit up a little, the straw rustles. Someone a few feet away is already up, probably on their knees, muttering a soft prayer. Not unusual. This in-between sleep period was considered sacred by many. This was the hour God listened best. You're supposed to use it for reflection. Repentance. Maybe a quiet chat with the Almighty while everyone else snoozes like sinners. But not everyone stuck to holy business. Some people apparently used this time to talk to ghosts. Yeah, that escalated quickly. There were widely held beliefs that the veil between the living and the dead grew thin at night, especially in the hush between first and second sleep. The dead could reach out or be heard or even seen. Some believed dreams during this time were more than just mental static. They were messages, from ancestors, from saints, from something else entirely. So if you saw your dead uncle in a dream during these hours and he told you to stop planting cabbage, you might actually dig up your entire garden out of respect. Some people took it even further. They actively tried to conjure spirits, not in a movie scene, Ouija board way, but through whispered prayers, offerings left out near the hearth, or even quiet singing. There's evidence of night watchers in some communities, folks who kept vigil through the middle of the night to spot omens or signs from the beyond. If a shadow moved the wrong way or a candle sputtered at the wrong moment, that might be a prophecy, or a warning, or just a drafty window, but good luck convincing them otherwise. And of course, if you weren't dealing with ghosts, you could always engage in a little socially sanctioned pillow talk. That's right. This in-between sleep time was also a favourite for couples to, shall we say, get reacquainted. Historical records show that doctors, religious writers, and even marriage manuals encouraged intimacy during this window. Supposedly the body was more balanced then, and conception was more likely. Some guides even recommended it. Medieval foreplay, brought to you by dim candlelight and zero privacy. You lay back again, thinking about all this. In the modern world, waking up at 1:47 a.m. is a crisis. You stress about how little time is left to sleep, whether you should get up, check your phone, make tea, scroll yourself into oblivion. But in this world, the midnight moment isn't a problem. It's an opportunity. People weren't expected to stay unconscious all night. In fact, this in-between state was a kind of third mental gear, one that hovered between waking logic and dreamy weirdness. You close your eyes again and imagine what it's like to use these hours intentionally. You'd pray maybe, or talk to a loved one, or, in some towns, even go out for a walk. Yeah, a walk. There are records of people heading outside at night, checking on livestock, visiting neighbours, even just standing under the stars. Think about that for a second. No motion sensor lights, no street lamps, just the moon and your feet on frozen dirt, your breath in the air, a house that creaks when you leave and stays quiet when you return. That part's real. It's in the records. But there's some debate about just how widespread this midnight movement was. Some historians argue that the whole idea of waking up and walking around at 1 a.m. has been romanticised by modern scholars, our attempt to inject mysticism into something that might have just been insomnia. They say we're reading too much into a few scattered references, that this idea of a calm, useful, in-between sleep period might have been the exception, not the norm. But even if that's true, the fact that anyone did it and wrote about it makes you wonder. So you let your mind go. You picture stepping outside barefoot on frosty grass, a candle in your hand. Maybe the stars are clear, maybe they're not. You hear a cow shuffle in the barn, a door creaks down the lane, somewhere someone else is up, maybe watching, maybe praying, maybe singing softly in the dark. You start to drift again. The second sleep is coming back. You feel it tug at your thoughts, quieting your breath, loosening your limbs. Whatever was happening in that half-wakeful hour, the spirits, the prayers, the whispered conversations, it fades into a slow, steady thrum. Your body remembers what it's here for, and this time it lets go fully. No more flickering candlelight, no more creaking wood, just the weight of blankets, the warmth of bodies nearby, and the deep velvet pull of a second sleep. You probably won't remember this one, but that's okay. You're not supposed to. It's still dark when the sound reaches you. Faint, but insistent. A distant bell tolling from somewhere beyond your dreams. Not a church bell ringing for mass. Not exactly. It's too early, too low. More like the world itself has a snooze button, and it's being slapped by a monk who's already been up for an hour. You don't know what time it is, no clocks here, but your body already knows. It's the sacred insomniac hour of monastic life, and you're about to be pulled into it whether you like it or not. You stir slowly, not because you're ready, but because that sound, the tolling, won't be ignored. You've spent the night in a guest chamber attached to a monastery, which sounded peaceful yesterday, picturesque even. You had visions of quiet gardens and humble routines, but now, in the deep cold of pre-dawn, the reality hits you. These monks do not sleep like mortals, and neither now do you. The bell rings again, and this time it's closer. A passing brother is making his rounds with a handbell, announcing the vigils, the first of 7 daily prayer services. In the Benedictine tradition, vigils happen before sunrise, often around 2:30 or 3:00 a.m. It's dark, it's cold, and it's very much on purpose. You sit up, groggy and stiff. The air inside your room is cold enough to make you reconsider every decision that led to this moment. Out in the hallway, the shuffle of sandals echoes off the stone walls. Monks wrapped in rough wool robes move silently in a procession toward the chapel. No one speaks, no one needs to. You grab your own borrowed cloak, it smells like centuries of incense and mild dampness, and follow them through a narrow corridor lit by oil lamps. Your breath fogs slightly in the chill, and your feet slap softly against worn flagstones. The chapel is dimly lit only by a few flickering tapers. The air is heavy with the scent of beeswax and stone and something ancient, like the residue of thousands of prayers. The monks file into wooden choir stalls, their voices rising in low, droning Latin chants. The sound is hypnotic, almost vibrational, and as you slide into a bench near the back, you feel the shape of time change around you. It's no longer about hours or minutes. It's about rhythm, about discipline, about surrendering your body clock to something bigger, older, and definitely more exhausting. Why on earth would anyone wake up at this ungodly hour just to chant in unison? Well, the short answer is because they thought it brought them closer to God. The longer answer? It's complicated. Monastic life in the medieval period was all about structure. Every day was carved up like a pie into slices of prayer, work, study, and sleep. And that first slice, vigils, was seen as the most sacred. The quiet hours before dawn were thought to be spiritually potent. Less distraction, less sin. The world was asleep, so the soul could be awake. But it wasn't just about piety, it was about identity. The rule of Saint Benedict, the foundational guideline for most Western monastic life, mandated these hours. Sleep was seen as a kind of spiritual vulnerability. Too much of it dulled the senses and led to temptation. So monks were trained, literally trained, to wake themselves early, to break sleep like bread, and to pray in the dark while the rest of humanity snored in sin. And believe it or not, there's a fringe theory that monastic schedules like these had ripple effects on society at large. Some scholars argue that the widespread adoption of clock-based timekeeping in later centuries, think bell towers, public clocks, shift work, can be traced directly back to monastic routines. The monks were basically the original alarm clocks, dragging everyone else into their divine schedule. You sit through the chanting, lulled by the repetition. You don't know Latins, but it hardly matters. The sounds wash over you like waves. You wonder how many nights these monks have done this. Thousands? Tens of thousands? Some of them look barely older than you, but there's an ancientness in the way they move, as if their bodies have memorized this dance from a previous life. After nearly an hour, the chanting ends. No applause, obviously, just a silent dispersal. Some monks head straight to their cells for a few more hours of sleep. Others begin morning tasks, collecting wood, preparing bread, tending to the sick. You follow the stream back through the cold hallway to your chamber, mind buzzing and body confused. It's still pitch dark outside. You could sleep. You probably should. But your thoughts are wide awake, jangling like wind chimes in a storm. There's a strange peace to it all, though. You can see how this rhythm might feel grounding, predictable. In a world full of plague, famine, and feudal chaos, at least you'd always know exactly when to pray. Even if it's 2:30 in the morning and your knees are sore from kneeling on stone, still not everyone saw this as noble. Some medieval commentators thought monks were pushing it, overly obsessed with ritual, prideful in their austerity. And yes, even monks themselves sometimes cheated the system. There are records of monks falling asleep during prayers, skipping vigils entirely, or sneaking extra naps. Because as holy as all this is supposed to be, sleep always wins eventually. You pull your blanket back up and lie down again, the chant still echoing faintly in your head. The candle has gone out, leaving only the glow of embers in the hearth. You think of the monks, already at work. You think of the townspeople still in their second sleep. You think of how strange it is that even in a world so different from your own, everyone still wrestled with the same basic rhythm of rest and wakefulness. And then you close your eyes. This time there are no ghosts, just silence. Morning creeps in slowly, like someone unsure if they're welcome. No sunrise spectacle, just a greyish haze bleeding through the wooden shutters, casting a soft, smudged light across the room. You open your eyes to the sound of feet shifting on floorboards, low murmurs, and the occasional rustle of wool. No alarm jolts you awake, no morning news, no phone glowing with notifications, just the quiet reality of being alive in a world that never had a snooze button. And when you finally sit up, you notice something peculiar. No one is lying flat. Not you. Not the elderly man curled in the corner with a crooked spine. Not the two children sharing a blanket, knees tucked close to their chests. Not even the dog, who somehow managed to sleep with its head up like it's on constant patrol. Everyone is either propped against something or contorted into some variation of upright sleeping, and that apparently is on purpose. Welcome to the medieval fear of lying flat. See, back then, reclining horizontally was risky business. The flat position was strongly associated with death, how corpses were laid out, how tomb effigies were sculpted, how graves received their final tenants. Lying completely prone? That was what the dead did, and so, if you valued your life, or your soul, you tended to sleep more diagonally, with pillows propping your back or against a wall or curled into a half-sitting posture like a cat pretending not to be exhausted. The idea wasn't just spiritual, there were medical reasons too, or at least what passed for medical reasons in the Middle Ages. The dominant belief system back then was based on the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health, people believed, depended on balancing these fluids, and lying flat, especially after a heavy meal of bread, beans, and dubious meat. That was just asking for your humours to stagnate. You wanted gravity on your side, literally. So you slept at an angle to help your digestion and keep your vital energies flowing, as prescribed by your neighbourhood physician, or more likely your great aunt who read one herbal scroll 20 years ago and now knows everything. The quirk gets even weirder when you look at the beds themselves. If you were lucky enough to have a bed, and that's a big if, it was often designed with this semi-sitting posture in mind. Some beds were built short so you could sit rather than stretch out. Others were angled slightly, with raised headboards or stacked straw bundles. And if you couldn't afford any of that, you made do, leaning against a wall, a barrel, or a large dog. Functional, if not exactly orthopedic. And pillows? Forget what you know. Medieval pillows were often firm, small, and in short supply. Some were just rolled up cloaks, others were actual pieces of wood or leather-covered bundles. You didn't rest your head gently like a spa influencer. You kind of braced it like a traveller waiting for a storm. It wasn't just posture that mattered, position did too. You were expected to sleep on your right side, left side was discouraged. Something about liver function, heart protection, or demonic interference depending on who you asked. Some physicians swore the right side position helped warm the stomach and protect the brain. Others believed that left side sleeping caused nightmares, or worse, visits from the devil. Sleeping on your back? Absolutely not. That was practically sending a handwritten invitation to dark forces. But here's a fun and highly debatable fringe theory. Some researchers believe upright sleeping may have actually helped prevent respiratory illness in colder months. Lying flat in a damp and drafty room filled with smoke and livestock dander. Recipe for disaster. Sleeping propped up might have offered a little protection. Less pressure on the lungs, better airflow, fewer chances of waking up coughing on your own tongue. Not that they knew that at the time, but sometime none in superstition accidentally hits the mark. Of course, there's still academic squabbling over whether this upright sleep habit was really that widespread. Some argue that plenty of people just flopped onto straw and passed out full flat style and no one batted an eye. But written accounts, especially among wealthier or religious communities, seem to reinforce the idea that sitting sleeping was not just tolerated, but encouraged, especially if you wanted to wake up without a demon sitting on your chest. More on that later. You shift a little, so trying to imagine spending years sleeping half upright. No memory foam, no contour pillow, just a wooden backrest and the prayer that your bile doesn't rebel overnight. Your spine feels stiff just thinking about it. But here, in this moment, in this dimly lit room, it somehow makes sense. This isn't a world built for luxury. It's a world built for survival, for spiritual vigilance, for digestive humility. The other strange thing, people didn't always sleep in silence. They talked. Conversations whispered in the dark long after the fires burned down weren't rare. People processed their days, planned tomorrow's chores, or told stories. Sometimes they debated theology, sometimes they argued about bread. It wasn't just rest, it was downtime, shared, chaotic, strangely cozy downtime. You lean back against the wall, adjusting your position the way someone else might plump a pillow. The grey morning light continues to bleed into the room, softening the edges of the wooden beams, the faded tapestries, the dirt floor with its scattering of straw. Someone across the room stretches and groans. Someone else curses under their breath as they sit up too fast and bump their head on a low beam. The pig snorts, the children giggle. It's a slow, communal reawakening. 1,000 years ago, and somehow it feels familiar. You press your back against the wall again, breathing in the old smoky air. Your spine complains, your knees ache, but your humours? They're probably aligned. And in this world, that's what counts. The day begins not with a peaceful yawn or the gentle sipping of tea, but with the collective groan of a roomful of bodies uncoiling from their half-sitting, half-sleeping pretzels. You blink your way into the morning light as someone fumbles open a shutter, letting in a sliver of grey that immediately makes everything colder. No me time here. No private bathroom, no steaming shower, no playlist of ocean sounds easing you into consciousness. Just the abrupt realisation that you've been sleeping 3 inches from someone else's armpit. Again. Because here's the thing, no one likes to admit when they romanticise medieval life. Beds were crowded. All the time. If you're picturing some sleepy peasant couple snuggled up in their little thatched cottage bed, adjust your expectations. That bed? It's probably shared with 3 children, 1 grandmother, a cousin visiting from the next village, and possibly a damp goat. You push off the covers, or what passes for them, and your feet hit the packed earth floor. Cold. Of course. The others are waking too, peeling themselves out of the human pile with the resigned grogginess of people who've done this 1,000 times. The air smells like wool, breath, and the faint sourness of last night's supper, which may or may not still be sitting in a pot near the hearth. Cosy is a relative term, so why all the bed sharing? Mostly because there was no other choice. Space was limited, heating was inefficient, and people didn't think about personal boundaries the way modern folks do. Beds were expensive to build. Blankets were hard to come by. If you had a warm body and a bit of straw to sleep on, you shared it. End of story. Rich, poor, noble, peasant, it didn't matter. Privacy wasn't just a luxury, it was a foreign concept. In many homes, especially among the lower classes, a single large bed dominated the main room. Entire families slept together, often shoulder to shoulder, because that was the warmest and most economical way to survive cold seasons. There were no spare rooms, no guest beds, just a shared body heat economy. You curled up next to whomever was nearby and learned to deal with it, snoring, twitching and all. Even in wealthier households, things weren't exactly spacious. Servants often slept at the foot of their lord's bed or in adjacent pallets. Visiting dignitaries might be expected to share beds with each other. Not romantically, just practically. In fact, bed sharing was so normal that even total strangers might share a bed in an inn, separated only by a small board or, if you were lucky, a personal blanket. You could literally pay for half a bed, like splitting an Airbnb with someone you met on the road. There's a historical term for this practice: sleeping double. And despite how it sounds, it was often seen as totally neutral. You'd talk, exchange news, maybe even gossip before drifting off. It was like bedtime social networking, just with the occasional lice risk. And speaking of that, let's not pretend this was a clean situation. Bed sharing meant more than just conversation. It meant fleas, lice, bedbugs, body odour. You didn't get a choice about hygiene partners. People bathed maybe once a week, maybe not. You couldn't just throw your linens in the washer. Most slept in the same clothes they wore during the day. Unless it was summer and nudity made more sense. More on that horror in a later section. You might have had a special shirt just for sleeping, but chances are it was crusty, patched, and shared between siblings when needed. The thing is, this wasn't seen as gross or invasive. It was normal. Warmth mattered more than space. Sleep was a necessity, not a luxury event. If someone rolled over and ended up spooning you, that was just life. If they kicked you in their sleep, also life. You adapted, you built a tolerance, you learned to sleep through movement, murmuring, even someone getting up to use the chamber pot 2 feet from your head. That part, yes, the toilet situation, is another shared experience. There was no ducking into a private bathroom. If you had to go during the night, you either held it, used a communal pot, or if you were lucky, had a close stool which is just a wooden box with a hole in it and a chamber pot beneath. Emptying it in the morning was someone's unfortunate chore, often a child, apprentice, or low-ranking servant. That's what you woke up to: cold air, someone tripping over a goat, and the unmistakable sound of a full night's worth of digestion being carried outside. Of course, in castles and manor houses, things were more refined, but still involved plenty of bed sharing. Kings and nobles had large canopy beds, often with elaborate curtains and feather mattresses stuffed with down or straw. But even those weren't private havens. Royal attendants or ladies in waiting were expected to be nearby, sometimes sleeping in the same room or even the same bed, especially during travel. The idea that a bedroom was a sacred individual retreat, not even on the radar yet. Interestingly, some historical records suggest bed sharing also functioned as a form of surveillance. Want to make sure your teenage daughter isn't sneaking out? Make her share a bed with her grandmother. Want to keep an eye on your new apprentice? They're sleeping next to you. Trust was a luxury, and body proximity was one way to enforce moral behaviour, though how well that worked is debatable. There's even a well-known example from 16th century England where a man claimed he was innocent of a crime because he'd been in bed with his entire family at the time, and everyone backed him up. Imagine that alibi today. Yeah, I couldn't have robbed that bakery. I was spooning my uncle at the time. Ironclad, your eyes with the others, stretching out the sleep cramps and brushing bits of straw off your tunic. There's no good morning chorus, just a lot of blinking, groaning, and maybe a fart or two. Someone yawns so loud it echoes. The pig looks unimpressed. And as you look around this crowded, chaotic sleeping arrangement, you realise that for all the discomfort, there's something oddly comforting about it. You weren't alone, not ever. Whether that's a blessing or a curse, well, that depends on who you were sleeping next to. Later that day, after a long stretch of yawning and blinking through chores, or maybe just imagining you're useful while others sweep and stir, you find yourself inside an inn on the road to nowhere special. The sun is already beginning to sink. The fire has been lit early, sapping in a stone hearth. You stretch your aching legs, roll your shoulders, and sigh. Maybe, just maybe, tonight you'll get your own space. You'd kill for a full bed to yourself, or at least half a mattress not shared with livestock, 6 snoring strangers, and someone whose feet seem to sweat professionally. And then your host says something strange. You'll be in the Great Bed tonight. You pause. The Great what? Turns out it's real. Massive, wooden, and wildly unnecessary, the Great Bed of Ware is one of the strangest sleep relics in British history. You walk into the room and there it is. A sprawling, carved behemoth that looks more like a parade float than something anyone should sleep on. It's nearly 11 feet square. You could land a small glider on this thing. You stand there, blinking, unsure whether to lie down or rent it out as an event venue. Here's the historical quirk. The Great Bed of Ware was built in the late 16th century for an inn in Ware, Hertfordshire. Supposedly designed as a gimmick to draw travellers, it was so large it could sleep at least 15 people at once, and that wasn't even considered weird. People came specifically to sleep in it, like it was a roadside attraction. Couples, families, drunk guys, all piling in. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a viral hotel experience. A photo op minus the photos. You run your hand over the frame. Oak, heavy, and deeply carved with graffiti. That's the best part. The bed still exists, and yes, it's covered in names. Carved initials, scratched hearts, crude doodles, all from guests marking their stay. A medieval guest book, right in the wood grain. You can imagine the couples sneaking in after too much ale, the children bouncing around, the lonely traveller pressed into a corner by snoring strangers. But the Great Bed wasn't just a one-off. It reflects something broader about how public and communal sleep used to be. Inns were cramped, chaotic places, beds were few, demand was high and comfort was relative. The bigger the bed, the more bodies you could stack into it, sardine style. And if you were on the road, you didn't expect privacy, you expected proximity. The line between public and private was thinner back then. Sleep, like everything else, was a communal act. You didn't get your own room unless you were rich. And even then, you might still share it with servants, guards, or companions, which, depending on the trip, might be relatives, diplomats, or someone you met 2 days ago and now inexplicably trust with your life. That's why something like the Great Bed made perfect sense. It was less a luxury and more a logistical solution. Got a wagon load of guests, toss them in the big bed. Nobody's shy, nobody's being modest, everyone's just tired. Of course, the Great Bed is an outlier in size, but not in spirit. Across Europe, shared beds were the norm in all sorts of public accommodations. Taverns and inns might charge by the share, not by the room. You'd show up, drop a few coins, and be assigned a spot next to a total stranger who may or may not snore like a broken bellows. If you complained, tough. That's what you paid for. And yes, things could get awkward. There are stories of travellers waking up to find someone else's feet in their face, or arguments over who got the blanket, or theft. Plenty of theft. You'd better sleep with one hand on your pouch and the other on your boots. People weren't always sleeping. Sometimes they were waiting for you to sleep. Still, it wasn't always miserable. Some guests bonded, told stories, sang songs, or played dice in bed. Beds were social spaces, especially in inns. You were all strangers when you got in, but you might leave the next morning having heard someone's life story, dreams, and family tree, whether you wanted to or not. The Great Bed of Ware became so famous that it was referenced in plays. Shakespeare even name-dropped it. That's how you know it made an impression. Imagine something so comically large and specific that the greatest writer of your era uses it as a punchline. And if you're wondering whether this giant bed was comfortable, not particularly. The mattress was stuffed with straw, sometimes feathers, and it sagged in the middle like a hammock made of bad decisions. The blankets were heavy and often damp from humidity, or the simple fact that 15 people generate a lot of body heat. The whole thing probably smelled like ale, shoes, and regret, but it was legendary, and sometimes that mattered more than comfort. There's an ongoing debate among historians about whether the bed was ever actually meant for sleeping, or if it was more symbolic, a tourist gimmick, a flex by the innkeeper, or a statement about hospitality. Some even speculate it was never truly slept in to capacity, but graffiti, records, and court references suggest otherwise. People did use it, enthusiastically, and probably snored loud enough to rattle the rafters. You step back from the bed and imagine it filled to the brim. People of every age and smell snuggled awkwardly close, someone talking in their sleep, someone elbowing a stranger, someone laughing too hard, making the bed shake. And for a brief moment you get it. Not the comfort part, definitely not, but the humanity of it. The messy, loud, snoring, sweating togetherness of medieval life. You won't sleep well tonight, but you won't be alone. You wake with someone's foot pressed gently against your ribcage. Not aggressively, just enough to remind you that personal space is a fiction invented centuries later. You slowly peel your cheek off the shared pillow, which smells like everyone who's ever used it, and take in your surroundings. The Great Bed did not, in fact, get smaller overnight. It remains huge, ridiculous, and far too populated. You count 7 snorers, 2 talkers, and 1 person quietly eating something in the dark. You decide not to ask. As you pull yourself up and swing your legs over the edge, careful not to kick a fellow lodger in the face, you realise something that was probably obvious from the start. There are no bedrooms. Not in the way you're used to, anyway. That cosy little room with a door, maybe some soft lighting, a side table with a book and a scented candle, doesn't exist. Not here, not now, because in the medieval world, the idea of a private sleeping space, separate, sealed, and sacred, hadn't really been invented yet. Instead, sleep happened where everything else happened, in shared spaces, One-room cottages, multi-purpose halls, open-plan manors. Your bed, if you had one, lived in the same space as your dinner table, your storage, your kitchen fire, your children, your animals, and, probably, your neighbour who just dropped in for a moment and is now sleeping beside you. Even in wealthier homes, the layout wasn't what you'd expect. You'd think a noble's manor would offer a sense of privacy, but nope. Most had large, multi-purpose rooms, called halls, where everyone ate, worked, argued, celebrated, and yes, slept. The lord and lady might have a bed behind a curtain or a decorative wooden screen, but servants were often just feet away, snoring near the hearth or on a bench. And those curtains? Decorative, not soundproof. You wander into the common room of the inn, still bleary-eyed, and it hits you. This isn't just how inns work, it's how life works. Sleeping in full view of others wasn't strange, it was the default. Children, parents, siblings, guests, even travelling strangers. The cultural expectation of personal, enclosed sleeping quarters hadn't yet taken hold. Bedrooms, as a concept, were luxury items reserved for royalty, upper clergy, or the very rich who could afford to heat and maintain multiple rooms. This communal setup also made security easier. One space was easier to guard. You didn't have to patrol multiple doors or worry about what was happening in that far-off West Wing where your teenager's up to no good. Everyone slept in one big shared bubble of mutual awareness. You snore, I snore, and together we avoid being murdered in our sleep. It's a system. That said, the move toward privacy was starting to creep in. By the late medieval period, especially in wealthier homes, people began carving out semi-private sleeping areas. The emergence of the solar, a small upper-floor chamber used by the lord's family, marked a turning point. Still not private in the modern sense, but at least separated by stairs, a door, or a glorified curtain. Baby steps toward bedtime boundaries. But for the average person, privacy didn't just not exist, it wasn't expected. No one thought it was weird to wake up with your entire family watching you drool in your sleep, or for your parents to be 3 feet away when you had a loud, questionably spiritual dream. If anything, solitude was suspicious. Why are you sleeping alone? Are you hiding something? Are you possessed? Who has a whole room just for lying down? What are you? A duke? It also affected relationships in weird ways. With no separate bedrooms, intimacy had to be creative. Couples learned to keep things quiet, or just learned to ignore whoever was snoring at their feet. There are even recorded complaints from medieval parents about their children being conceived too loudly in shared spaces, which, is relatable and horrifying. One early church moralist even wrote that it was more pious to abstain altogether than risk being overheard. Thanks, medieval guilt. But beyond intimacy, the lack of bedroom space meant your dreams, your rituals, your nightmares, all of it played out under observation. You didn't get to wake up screaming and process it quietly in your ensuite bathroom. No, you woke up screaming and someone threw a shoe at you. It was a different kind of support system. And yet, in the middle of this crowded, noisy mess, people still found ways to make sleep personal. Some carried special blankets or sleep charms. Others had rituals, little whispered prayers, herbs tucked into the folds of their bedding, bits of wax or stone they kept beneath their heads to ward off dreams. A shared space didn't mean a shared mind. Everyone still had their own strange ideas about what sleep meant, and how to do it properly. You step outside the inn for a breath of fresh air, the dawn mist curling around your feet. The world is quiet now in a way it rarely is inside. No snoring, no groaning floorboards, no pig scratching itself against the bed frame. Just you and the idea that somewhere along the timeline, we invented rooms, and doors, and locks, and the ability to roll over without hitting someone else in the face. It's tempting to look back and romanticize it all, to say, wow, people were so connected back then. But let's be honest, most of them would have killed for a room of their own and a mattress that didn't smell like soup. Still, there's something strange and almost comforting about how human sleep used to be. Messy, communal, honest. You didn't hide it. You lived it, right in the middle of everyone else. And maybe that's the weirdest part of all. Not the ghosts, not the upright posture, not even the giant bed with 15 people in it. It's the fact that people used to dream with their eyes closed and their doors open. It's nighttime again. You're lying on your back, or technically your side because you've learned your lesson, and the inn is dark except for the faint flicker of firelight crawling up the walls. You'd think by now, After everything you've seen, you'd be used to it. The lack of privacy. The straw poking your thighs, the low murmur of someone dreaming out loud about bread. But tonight, something's different. You're cold, not a chill, not a breeze. It's that deep, bone-scraping cold that makes your skin stiff and your soul second-guess your life choices. You yank the covers up, but it's no use. The blanket is thin and the air bites. And then it hits you. You're sleeping in what amounts to a nightgown the width of a scarf. And you're one of the lucky ones. Because when it comes to medieval sleepwear, the general rule was this: you're either naked or nearly naked, and either way, you're uncomfortable about it. There were no matching pyjama sets, no cozy fleece onesies, no temperature-regulating bamboo sleepwear from some startup run by influencers. The idea of clothing specifically designed just for sleep hadn't really arrived yet. Not for most people. Clothes were functional. You wore what you needed, when you needed it. Sleep wasn't an aesthetic, it was an interruption between chores. For peasants, what you wore to bed depended on two things: how cold it was and how much you cared. Some people just slept in their day clothes. It was warm, it saved time and changing in the dark while 6 other people pretended not to look. Awkward. Others stripped down to a thin shift, basically a long undershirt. Or, if they were particularly carefree or poor, absolutely nothing at all. That's right, nude sleeping was completely normal in some households, especially in summer, especially if you didn't have another set of clean clothes to wear. It wasn't seen as scandalous. Well, not always. In certain religious communities, sleeping naked was discouraged or even forbidden, considered immodest or spiritually unsafe. But in regular homes, no one blinked. You were poor, you were tired, and your tunic smelled like turnips. You took it off. Now, if you were wealthy, you had more options, at least theoretically. Nobles sometimes wore long nightgowns made of linen or wool called nightshirts or sleeping robes. These were sometimes embroidered, occasionally fancy, and usually more about status than comfort. If you had servants helping you dress for bed, it made sense to have something elegant to wear, even if you were just planning to pass out under 6 fur blankets and ignore your problems until morning. You roll onto your side, your own scratchy shift clinging to your skin. It's not quite warm, not quite soft, and definitely not flattering, but it's better than nothing. Across the room you hear the rustle of someone turning over, their bare arm catching the firelight. Someone else coughs into the blankets. A third person sleepily mutters what sounds like a medieval curse. And then there's the lice. Oh yes, lice were practically permanent residents in many sleeping quarters. Clothes weren't washed frequently, water was scarce, soap was homemade and unreliable, and honestly people had bigger problems. So the layers you wore to bed were often just as lice-friendly as your daytime outfit. Some people kept combs near the bed to pick them out before sleep. Others just lived with it. One particularly cursed tradition involved wearing a linen sleep cap, not to keep warm, but to catch falling lice. If you've never slept with a bug net on your head, congratulations, you're not medieval. There were fringe attempts to combat this. Herbal sachets stuffed with mint, wormwood or lavender were sometimes tucked into pillows or bedclothes to repel insects. They didn't always work, but hey, at least your lice were aromatically confused. Some folks swore by garlic rubbed on the skin. Others sprinkled dried rosemary on their blankets. It was less science and more witchy hope, but again, points for trying. Still, maybe the oddest part of medieval sleepwear wasn't what people wore. It was what they did around the act of undressing. Because here's the thing, changing clothes was public, bedrooms were shared, so the process of getting ready for bed, removing layers, brushing off straw, scratching wherever needed, happened in front of others, slowly, casually, while someone else might be eating or knitting or half asleep next to a pig. The concept of modesty, as you know it, didn't quite apply. It's worth noting that in some parts of Europe, people did start to develop more structured sleepwear habits, especially by the late medieval period. In Italy and parts of France, wealthy men began wearing loose night drawers, basically pyjama pants, while upper-class women might wear finely woven linen shifts for bed, sometimes perfumed. There was even a brief trend of bed jackets, short robes worn for evening reading or prayer. But this was still rare, and reading in bed, let's not even pretend that was widespread. First, books were absurdly expensive. Second, candles burned out quickly and filled the room with smoke. And third, most people couldn't read. If you wanted a bedtime story, someone had to tell it, and that someone was usually half asleep themselves. Still, there's an odd intimacy to it all, lying in a room full of people who've all stripped down to the same simple fabric, No fancy pajamas, no separate rooms, no Instagram-worthy night routines. Just bodies, breath, and the shared need to survive until morning. You shift again, trying to get comfortable. The fire has burned lower. The darkness is thicker now. Your thin shift clings to your skin with that unpleasant, clammy texture that only old linen can manage. Still, there's warmth from the others. A shared sigh, a quiet snore, the rustle of someone scratching their scalp followed by a tiny, sleepy curse. It's gross. It's weird. It's kind of beautiful. And it makes you wonder, did they ever imagine a world where people slept alone in matching pajamas, in pristine rooms with electric candles and white noise machines? Probably not. They were just trying not to freeze. The mattress crackles every time you shift, like you're lying on a pile of autumn leaves instead of something meant for sleep. You roll carefully onto your side, then immediately regret it. Some invisible pointy object jabs your hip through the stuffing. You adjust again. Now your knees sinking into a hollow. The person next to you lets out a grunt, half snore, half complaint, and shifts the other way, setting off their own small avalanche of straw. Welcome to the wonderful itchy world of medieval mattresses, where every night is a crunchy, pokey adventure, and comfort is more of a suggestion than a reality. Let's get one thing straight. Nobody was sleeping on a memory foam. The bed you're currently stuck to is a canvas sack stuffed with straw, reeds, heather, or sometimes rags, whatever was available, vaguely soft and didn't cost more than a few coins. These sacks were known as palliasses, and they were the go-to mattress for peasants, apprentices, monks, and pretty much anyone who didn't have royal blood or a solid bribe for the bedmaker. If you were particularly fancy or desperate, you might mix in a little sheep's wool or feathers, but that came with its own problems. Wool retained moisture, feathers poked through, and if you didn't air the thing out regularly, the stuffing could rot from the inside, turning your bed into a pungent, semi-living organism. A straw mattress needed to be changed seasonally, or at least fluffed and refreshed. And by refreshed, we mean taken outside and beaten with a stick until the bugs ran out. You sink deeper into the mattress, and it sort of moulds to you, but not in a good way. More like a hammock that's been through a war. One side is flatter than the other, like someone heavier slept there for a decade and carved a dip with their spine. You try to find the sweet spot, but the stuffing has migrated. A lumpy ridge presses against your ribs, and you're pretty sure something just moved beneath you. A beetle, a straw flea, someone's long-lost belt buckle, and don't even think about the bed frame if you're lucky enough to have one. The most basic frames were wooden planks laid across supports, simple, creaky, and prone to sudden collapse. Rope beds, a slightly nicer upgrade, involved a wooden frame with a lattice of thick cord stretched across. The ropes would sag over time, which led to the now charming phrase sleep tight, as in, tighten the ropes so your mattress doesn't drop you onto the floor like a sack of grain. Sweet dreams. But not every home had a proper bed. In many households, people just rolled out a straw mat or slept directly on a pile of loose hay covered with a cloth. No frame, no rope, no mattress. Just you, the floor, and a silent prayer that a mouse doesn't walk across your face at 3 a.m. It's less bedroom and more barn loft with optimism. You weren't chasing luxury, you were chasing not dying of exposure. And yes, beds were often shared, so all this delightful crunchiness was enjoyed together. You didn't just tolerate your own lumps, you adapted to someone else's tossing, turning, sweating, and very personal relationship with flatulence. You want to move, you have to communicate. You want the blanket, you have to negotiate. It's like a sleepover, except no one leaves, and the mattress is made of old weeds. In wealthier homes, mattresses could be quite plush, filled with goose feathers, supported by carved bed frames, and stacked high with multiple layers. But even those weren't immune to medieval weirdness. Without standardized mattress sizes or materials, every bed had its own personality, and often its own insects. Rich or poor, everyone scratched something in the morning. To deal with the ambience, many people placed herbs in or around their bedding. Lavender, mint, and wormwood were popular, partly because they smelled nice, and partly because they discouraged lice and fleas. You might even find sachets sewn into the corners of the mattress or tucked beneath pillows. Did it work? Kind of. Did it smell better? Probably. Did it guarantee a restful night? Absolutely not. You shift again, a fresh crunch, your nose itches. You resist the urge to scratch, mostly because you're not sure if it's just dry air or something crawling. Someone across the room sneezes violently. Someone else mutters a half-hearted, "bless you," then returns to snoring. You think about your own bed back home, saggy maybe, but clean, soft, predictable. The kind of place where your weight doesn't shift a layer of straw and produce a tiny itchy landslide. But here, there's something almost grounding about the discomfort. You're not floating in a plush cloud, you're lying on the earth more or less, wrapped in coarse fabric, pinned in place by gravity, history, and other people's elbows. And that brings us to the open debate among historians. Were medieval people just tougher than we are? Or did they simply not know what they were missing? Some argue that the human body adapted to these basic conditions, that the average medieval sleeper didn't wake up sore or cranky because this was all they knew. Others suggest they did wake up sore and cranky. They just didn't complain about it because they were too busy surviving famine, war, or the fact that the bread was 40% sawdust this year. You exhale slowly, trying not to inhale straw dust. Somewhere in the room, someone turns over, setting off a domino effect of creaks and groans. A dog barks outside, someone's boots thump against the wall. The fire pops. You let yourself sink carefully into the mattress, trying not to find the sharp stick that escaped the last beating. Sleep doesn't come easily, but eventually your body gives in, not because you're comfortable, but because you're exhausted. And really, that's what medieval mattresses were all about. Not indulgence, not softness, just getting through the night. Tomorrow you'll wake up with straw in your hair, an itch you don't trust, and the full body impression of a turnip in your back. But for now, you close your eyes, listen to the sleepy chorus around you, and let the crunch of history cradle you to sleep. It's morning again, Jen. Not that you need the sun to tell you. You wake up because your shoulder hurts, your neck feels like it's been in a sword fight, and someone nearby is coughing like they're trying to exercise a lung. You sit up slowly, straw sticking to your shift, and take inventory. You've survived another night in the world's lumpiest bed, your knees still work, barely, and no mysterious bites, yet. Small victories. Someone passes you a crust of bread, which is apparently breakfast, and then casually suggests you might be out of balance. You blink. What does that even mean? You're definitely not feeling emotionally balanced after sleeping in a medieval dog pile, if that's what they mean. But no, it's your humours. Someone nearby says you look a bit yellow and wonders if your bile's been stirred. And now, congratulations, your health is officially a fluid problem. Welcome to the delightful oozing world of humoral theory, where your sleep and everything else about you is governed by 4 ancient body fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. You're not just tired. You're suffering from an imbalance that could explain everything from nightmares to back pain to your recently awful attitude. In the medieval mind, all of it circles back to your inner soup. The theory dates back to ancient Greece, but medieval Europe really embraced it with unsettling enthusiasm. Your body was basically a leaky cauldron of these 4 humours, and every aspect of your life, including sleep, was affected by how well balanced they were. Too much black bile, you're melancholy and probably sleep too much. Too much yellow bile, you're irritable and your sleep is restless. Excess phlegm makes you sluggish and dull. And too much blood? Strangely enough, that was usually seen as a good thing, except when it wasn't, and then you were bled with leeches. Sleep wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a diagnostic tool. Doctors, and we're using that word loosely, could analyse your sleep habits to determine what was wrong with you. If you slept too much, clearly you were suffering from cold and moist conditions, which meant you were phlegmatic. Cure: warming herbs and less rest. Couldn't sleep at all, your yellow bile was probably too active. Solution: a cooling diet, no wine, and a series of confusing prayers. And this is where things got truly wild. People genuinely believed that the position you slept in could affect your humours. Sleep on your left side? It stimulated black bile. Bad. Right side? Help digestion. Back? Summon nightmares and demons. Stomach? Unnatural and vaguely sinful. There were even medieval physicians who advised changing sides mid-sleep to maintain balance. You imagine them lecturing a peasant who hasn't had more than 4 hours of sleep in a month. Yes, I know you're exhausted, but try rolling halfway through, for the bile. Oh, and sleep was also linked to seasons. Winter encouraged sleep, cold and wet conditions supported the phlegmatic humour. Summer, less sleep, too much heat stirred the choleric. Spring and autumn had their own complicated effects. But let's just say, if you were sleepy in May, someone might genuinely prescribe dried mint and bloodletting. And don't even get them started on food. You eat a heavy dinner of meat and beans, you've heated the blood, and now your dreams will be chaotic, possibly demonic. and entirely your fault. The medical consensus: eat light, eat early, and eat bland if you want to sleep like a well-balanced human juice box. You think back to last night's suspicious stew and realise you probably ingested 40% of your problems. What's wild is how seriously people took this. Doctors, clergy, midwives, all of them used humoral theory to guide sleep advice. People arranged their bedrooms, if they had them, based on airflow, moisture and temperature, all of which were believed to affect humours. Your pillow's height, your mattress stuffing, even your bedtime routine could be prescribed according to your fluidic imbalances. And no surprise, there was a class divide here too. Wealthy people had better access to medical advice and could afford the herbs, wines and special pillows thought to regulate their sleep. Poor people, they were told to pray more and stop complaining. If that didn't work, there was always leech therapy, which honestly sounds worse than sleeping on a straw mat. Modern historians debate just how seriously your average person took this. Did peasants actually lie awake at night wondering if their yellow bile was acting up? Probably not, but they were influenced by the culture around them, religious teachings, local healers, the village gossip who was very confident about her licorice root infusion. Even if they didn't use the official terms, people understood sleep through the lens of balance, warmth and energy. It wasn't about circadian rhythms, it was about whether your internal stew was simmering nicely. You finish your bread and look at the others stretching and coughing around you. Someone sneezes and is immediately offered dried fennel. Someone else complains of back pain and gets told to drink less ale and bathe in warm milk if they can find it. You wonder, briefly, what a medieval spa day looks like. Probably terrifying. Still, there's something oddly poetic about the whole thing. Sleep as a window into your inner weather. Dreams as signals from the fluid kingdom. The idea that rest isn't just for muscles, but for restoring harmony. Sure, it's mostly nonsense, but it's a kind of nonsense that treats your body like a mystery to be solved, not punished. You lie back down for a moment, head against a half-flat pillow, and imagine your humours swirling like medieval lava lamps. Balanced, slightly mint-scented, ready for another round of crunchy, mildly cursed sleep. And if they're not, well, someone in the next village swears by leeches. The next night falls like a damp curtain, heavy and slow, and your body knows it's time to wind down long before anyone announces it. There's no electricity, no clocks ticking on the wall, no social media reminding you what time it is somewhere else. Just the quiet dimming of the sky and the soft collective sigh of people who've spent their day hauling water, cutting wood, or trying not to be accused of sorcery. You wrap yourself in your scratchy blanket, curl into the least pokey part of the straw mattress, and let your eyelids droop. And then, the dream begins. It's vivid, strangely specific. You're in a garden, no, a chapel, no, maybe both. Someone is speaking to you, but you don't remember their face. You feel warm and heavy and slightly confused. There's a sense of revelation, of meaning, of something important just about to click. And when you finally wake up, sweaty, disoriented, maybe drooling a little, it's still with you. The belief that dreams mean something. Because in the medieval world, dreams weren't just weird nighttime movies your brain stitched together for fun. They were messages, often divine, sometimes demonic, always taken seriously by someone with a robe and a candle. You sit up slowly, still caught in the last threads of your own subconscious rambling. The room is dark, quiet except for the creak of the wood, and someone nearby gently snoring into what sounds like a sack of flour. But your mind is racing, because that dream, it felt important. And if you'd had it 800 years ago, you wouldn't be reaching for a dream journal. You'd be heading straight for the local dream interpreter, or maybe your priest, or maybe just your nosy neighbour who once dreamed about cows and correctly predicted a hailstorm. In the medieval mind, dreams were a window into God's will, or your own soul, or, if things had really gone off the rails, a demonic intrusion. The stakes were high. You didn't just brush a dream off as random nonsense, you analysed it. You looked for patterns, symbols, warnings, encouragement. Whatever a dream gave you, you assumed it was on purpose. This idea wasn't fringe. Theologians, scholars, and even royalty documented and dissected their dreams. Monks filled entire manuscripts with dream records, visions of angels, saints, flaming swords, and disapproving dead relatives. They believed sleep peeled back the veil between the natural and supernatural. The real world was one layer, dreams were another, deeper one, more true, more raw, more divine. You look around the room again, half expecting someone else to jolt awake and gasp something prophetic. It wouldn't be the first time. There are stories of people dreaming of miraculous healings, then waking to find their fevers broken. Others dreamt of saints who gave them instructions, what to plant, who to forgive, what road to take. There were even cases where someone dreamed of a hidden object, a relic or a stolen item, and found it exactly where the dream said it would be. And then there were the warning dreams, where someone's misdeeds were revealed through their subconscious, cheating spouses, greedy merchants, shady monks. Nobody was safe from the nightly moral surveillance system. One wrong dream, and suddenly you're standing in front of your parish priest trying to explain why you dreamed about drowning in honey, while a goat whispered scripture at you. Symbolism was king. Of course, not every dream was about divine truth. There were whole debates among scholars about which dreams were divinely inspired and which were just your brain being weird because you ate onions too late. Theologians like Augustine and Aquinas tried to draw lines. Dreams from God were clear, moral, purposeful. Dreams from demons were confusing, tempting, chaotic. Dreams from your own body, well, that was your fault for being gluttonous or sleeping too long. Some people took this system to heart. They prayed before bed not just for rest, but for the right kind of dream. They asked for visions, guidance, messages. There were even certain saints you could pray to if you wanted a productive dream, Saint Raphael being one of them. Others would drink sleep-inducing herbal mixtures believed to open the mind to visions. Not to mention a few fringe folks who straight up slept in graveyards hoping to receive wisdom from the dead. You stretch out again, half amused and half unsettled. You never thought your dreams could get you accused of heresy, or earn you a pilgrimage, or set off a village-wide panic because someone dreamed a comet was going to hit the harvest. But here, in this world, dreams carry weight. You dream about fire. You might be called to give a sermon. You dream of birds flying backward, better stockpile grain. You dream of a three-headed dog. Either you're sick or Satan is nearby. Either way, someone's lighting a candle. Of course, though, there's the awkward flip side, dreaming about the wrong person, especially romantically, especially if they're married. In some places, a lustful dream was considered almost as bad as the real thing, because if you dreamed it, it meant the sin was already in your heart. Not only did you have to wake up feeling embarrassed and sweaty, you might have to confess it, in detail, to a priest who absolutely did not want to hear about your midnight fantasies involving the baker's apprentice and a suspiciously large wheel of cheese. Still, some dreams were seen as gifts. People shared them at breakfast, leaders consulted them before battles, parents taught their children what signs to watch for. The boundary between sleep and waking life was thinner then. Dreams bled into reality, and sometimes reality answered back. There's still scholarly debate over how seriously the average person took all this. Did everyone really believe their dreams were messages, or did they just use them for entertainment? Some argue the elite, monks, scholars, kings, projected their dream obsession downward, while most peasants probably muttered weird and went back to digging up beets. But even so, dream books circulated, filled with interpretations for everything from rabbits to thunder to lost shoes. Someone was reading them, someone cared. You lie back down and close your eyes, heart still thumping a little from your earlier vision. Maybe it was a message, maybe it was your body digesting lentils. Either way, you feel yourself slipping again, down into the deep, strange waters where logic has no grip, and every sheep has an opinion. And maybe, just maybe, someone or something is waiting for you there. You wake up gasping, heart pounding, skin clammy. You sit bolt upright in the dark, lungs straining, limbs tangled in a blanket that's somehow become a noose. It takes a moment to realize where you are, that you're not still in the dream, that the ceiling hasn't caved in, and that no one is sitting on your chest. Except, actually, it felt like someone was. And not metaphorically, like literally. A heavy, unseen weight pinning you down, watching, waiting. Welcome to the medieval phenomenon known today as sleep paralysis. But back then, it was more dramatic, more personal, more demonic. In the flickering candlelight, or maybe it's just moonlight, you can't tell, your brain still thrums with the tail end of whatever just visited you. A shadow in the corner, a pressure on your ribs, the sound of breath that wasn't yours. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like just a dream. And if you were living in medieval Europe, that feeling was not only valid, it was solid. Because in those days, when you woke up frozen, unable to move, breath shallow, heart racing, there was a simple explanation, A nightmare demon had come to pay a visit, and in many cultures it even had a name. The English called it the mare, the root of our modern word nightmare. Not just a bad dream, but a malevolent being, a spirit or creature that sat on your chest and smothered you as you slept. Other regions had their own versions. In Scandinavia, it was the Mara, a spectral woman who slipped into your bedroom and pressed the life out of you. In Germany, it was the Alp, a goblin-like figure who crept in through keyholes to torment sleepers. In Slavic folklore, it was a witch. In parts of France, the culprit was sometimes thought to be a succubus, a female demon who didn't just smother you, but seduced and drained you. You glance around the room again, even though you know there's nothing there now, but in this candleless, crowded chamber, it's easy to imagine how people came to these conclusions. There's no science yet, no neurology, no REM cycle charts, just the raw experience of waking into terror with no voice, no breath, and no control. You feel haunted, and so, of course, you believe you've been haunted. The night terror wasn't just personal, it was communal. People talked about these visitations openly. The mayor visited me last night, they'd say, or the witch sat on my chest. Some saw it as a punishment for sin. Others believed it was the work of an enemy, someone in the village casting dark spells or sending spirits to harass you. Waking up paralysed wasn't just terrifying, it could start feuds, or worse, trials. And this wasn't limited to peasants with wild imaginations. Educated people, monks, physicians, even full nobles, wrote about the phenomenon with absolute seriousness. Medical texts from the period described the experience of waking up unable to breathe, the chest constricted, the body frozen. The cause? Most said it was the accumulation of humours, naturally, specifically phlegm, because why not? But many admitted it could also be the work of unclean spirits. So what did people do about it? First you'd pray. Hard. There were specific prayers designed to protect you from nighttime demons. Psalm 91 was a favourite. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night. Protective charms were also popular. Crucifixes above the bed, relics under the pillow, or even knives placed under mattresses to ward off spirits. Yes, knives. Because if a demon sits on you, clearly what you need is a blade underneath your spine. You might also try to identify the source. Had you offended someone recently? Had you been eating too much before bed? Was your mattress stuffed with something cursed? In some cases, people rearranged their entire sleeping situation. New room, new straw, new bedmate, just to shake off the demon's interest. And then there were the witchcraft trials, the truly chilling side of this belief. If your nighttime attacks continued, and especially if others in your village reported similar experiences, suspicion could spread and people wanted someone to blame. And if you happened to be an old woman with a mole and an unfriendly personality, well, good luck. More than one person accused of witchcraft met their fate because someone claimed they'd felt them on their chest in the night. It was hard to prove innocence when the crime occurred in someone else's dream. Some fringe theories in modern scholarship suggest that sleep paralysis might have even played a role in the witch panic. Think about it. Dozens of people in a village all reporting eerie, paralysing dreams, waking up unable to breathe, haunted by female figures. It starts sounding like a case of mass sleep disruption, and no way to explain it except the supernatural. It's speculation, sure, but compelling. You lie back down, now wide awake, trying not to think about the hundreds of years people spent fighting invisible, suffocating phantoms with herbs, prayers, and pocket knives. Even now in the 21st century, people still report the exact same symptoms: chest pressure, paralysis, looming dread. Only now we tell ourselves it's just the brain waking up wrong. The science is there, the explanations are better, but the fear, still exactly the same. In this medieval world, though, no one tells you it's a brain glitch. They nod in sympathy, offer you a sprig of rosemary, suggest a fast, a priest might bless your bed. Your neighbour might casually mention that her cousin once died from a mare attack. Just, something to keep in mind. And maybe the worst part? The sense that you're not alone even after you wake up. That whatever sat on your chest might still be in the room, just crouching in the corner waiting. That sense of being watched. That shiver that crawls across your shoulders as you pull the blanket up to your neck and whisper a quiet prayer. Not for sleep, but for safety. You close your eyes, but the fear lingers. A silence that feels too thick. A room that feels too full. You tell yourself it was just a dream, but part of you, the ancient medieval part, knows better. By now you've more or less accepted the odd, scratchy, noisy chaos of medieval sleeping arrangements. The straw, the snoring, the constant potential for demonic chest pressure. You've adapted, mostly. But tonight, you're not in an inn or a farmhouse or a damp castle corner. You're under the sky, literally. No roof, no walls, just you, the stars, and the looming realization that sleeping outdoors in medieval times wasn't unusual. It was kind of normal. You're wrapped in a threadbare cloak lying on a thin bed of grass, listening to the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of someone trying to convince a donkey to calm down. Your back is already regretting this decision, and the dew hasn't even set in yet. But the thing is, this wasn't seen as roughing it. This was a valid way to spend the night. People in the Middle Ages slept outside for all sorts of reasons. Travel, necessity, religious devotion, or, honestly, just because there wasn't room anywhere else. The idea of a home as a fixed private space wasn't the reality for many. So when the sun went down, you found a safe-ish patch of land, laid your cloak down, curled into yourself like a human pastry, and hoped for the best. You pull the hood of your cloak up and glance at the sky. It's a clear night. Lucky you. If it were raining, you'd be dealing with mud, soaked blankets, and possibly a frog making eye contact with you from your boot. But tonight, it's stars and pavements and a breeze that smells like sheep and damp earth. Strangely peaceful if you can ignore the tickle of what might be a beetle in your sleeve. Travellers, especially poor ones, expected to sleep outdoors. Roads between villages were long, often dangerous, and inns weren't always available or affordable, so people camped. Not with tents or cosy campfires, but with the bare minimum. A cloak, maybe a walking stick, and ideally someone else to watch your back while you slept. Highwaymen were a real issue, and medieval nightfall was when danger put on its best boots and went out hunting. But people adapted. They knew where to sleep, near churches, along familiar paths, beside hedgerows, some huddled under carts or tucked into barn alcoves with permission, or without it, depending on desperation. It was understood that if you were travelling by foot or cart, you'd be bedding down wherever you could. Sleeping outside wasn't seen as inherently shameful. In fact, pilgrims, those travelling for religious reasons, often slept beneath the stars as part of their spiritual journey. It was considered humbling, holy even, to rest on the earth itself. You adjust your position and feel the ridge of a root press into your spine. You shift again, trying to find that magic patch of ground that isn't aggressively poking you. The cloak helps, but it's thin and smells like wet wool and regret. Still, there's something kind of magical about it. The moon casts long shadows across the grass. You can hear the distant creak of trees in the wind. In a way, you're more connected to the world than you've ever been, even if your kidneys are already filing a complaint. Of course, not everyone saw outdoor sleep as romantic. Plenty of folks ended up outside because they were homeless, banished, or just out of luck. Vagrants, beggars, criminals, and outcasts, many had no choice but to sleep wherever they weren't chased off. Churchyards, bridges, alleyways. Some cities implemented curfews to keep undesirables from loitering too long. But enforcement was uneven, and a dark corner with decent cover could be the difference between a tolerable night and frostbite. Still, others chose to sleep outside, even when they didn't have to. Hermits, for example, embraced outdoor living as a spiritual act. Some monks and nuns took vows of extreme poverty and lived in the wilderness, sleeping in caves or under trees, convinced that discomfort brought them closer to God. There are records of saints who refused shelter altogether, claiming the stars were roof enough and anything more was vanity. There's even a strange fringe theory that in some communities, seasonal outdoor sleeping was common. During warm months, whole families might move their bedding outside for cooler air and more space. Think of it as medieval glamping minus the Instagram and plus a very real risk of waking up with a toad on your face. But it does make a kind of sense. If your house is small, smoky and full of people, stepping outside for sleep might be the least chaotic option. And it wasn't just countryside peasants doing this. Even in towns, you could find people curled up in alleyways, courtyards, or leaning against shop walls. If the weather was good and you were too tired to walk home, or too drunk to remember how, you might just sleep where you fell. Not ideal, but not unheard of either. Still, the risks were real. Besides theft and weather, there were wolves, especially in the forested regions. Packs could and did attack livestock, and occasionally people, making certain areas a no-go for nighttime wanderers. Some travellers carried bells or torches to keep predators at bay. Others relied on the safety of numbers, choosing to sleep near others in loose clusters, like confused medieval meerkats. You lie still for a moment, staring up at the sky. The stars are brighter than you've ever seen them. No city glow, no light pollution, just the Milky Way smeared across the heavens like a watercolour accident. It's beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. You get why people might have felt closer to the divine out here. It's humbling. It's vast. It also makes you really, really wish for a pillow. Eventually your body begins to relax. The grass stops poking you so aggressively. The wind dies down. Someone nearby is softly snoring, possibly human, possibly sheep. You pull the cloak tighter around you and let your thoughts drift. You're just a speck under an endless sky, trying to get a few hours of rest before the world starts moving again. And in this moment, freezing, itchy, exposed, you get a glimpse of what it meant to sleep without walls, to trust the night not to swallow you, to share your dreams with the wind. You're not sure you'll sleep well, but you'll sleep honestly. It's morning again, and this time there's hay in your hair. Actual hay. A stalk sticks out from behind your ear like a poorly chosen fashion accessory, and your back feels like it's been used as a bench for a medieval tavern brawl. You blink at the rising sun, stretch, or at least attempt to, and try to process your surroundings. You're not in a bed. You're not even in a room. You're curled up beside a barn, wrapped in a damp cloak that smells like wet goat and the slow surrender of dignity. And speaking of goats, one is currently standing uncomfortably close, eyeing you with the kind of judgment only livestock can deliver. That's when you realise you're not alone, not just with goats, but with chickens, maybe a pig or two, and a dog snoring softly near your foot. This isn't an accident, this is intentional, because in the Middle Ages, people often slept with animals, and not metaphorically, literally, right there, in the same space, sometimes in the same bed. You drag yourself upright, trying not to brush against anything with hooves or feathers, and take stock of your situation. You're in what passes for the warmest part of the property, just inside the barn's main wall, near where the hearth smoke drifts in through a gap in the thatch. It smells like manure and ash, and yet, it's not the worst night's sleep you've had lately. Because animals, for all their noises and smells and intrusive staring, come with one undeniable benefit. They're warm. In a world without insulation, central heating, or even decent windows, body heat was gold. You didn't waste it. Families huddled together, not just with each other, but with their animals. Sheep, pigs, dogs and chickens all slept in close proximity, sometimes in corners of the main living area, other times in attached barns with loose barriers, and occasionally right at the foot of the bed. And for poorer families who couldn't afford separate spaces for livestock, the entire household, human and animal, just settled into one smoky, muddy, shared sleep zone. You brush straw off your lap and glance around. A sow snorts in her sleep. A hen flutters her wings, possibly dreaming of revenge. It's chaotic, but there's a strange sense of routine here. Everyone knows their place. The animals have long adapted to the sounds of human sleep, and the humans? They've learned to sleep through snuffling, scratching, bleating, and the occasional middle-of-the-night crow. Of course, this wasn't just about staying warm. Animals in the home also meant security. A barking dog could alert you to an intruder. A restless animal might sense a fire before you smelled smoke. Pigs, despite their reputation, are surprisingly perceptive. Chickens less so, but they do provide an early warning system for dawn, like it or not. In short, your nighttime animal roommates weren't just cuddly heat sources, they were your rural alarm system. Naturally, there were drawbacks. Hygiene? That's a generous word. Animals brought fleas, mites, mud, and other contributions to your domestic ecosystem. You haven't lived until you've tried to sleep through a pig rooting under your bed, or a chicken laying an egg on your pillow. There were also the smells, strong, persistent, and utterly immune to your modern sensibilities. Think burning peat, wet fur, and something that might be fermented cabbage. Now imagine breathing that for 8 hours while you spooned your cousin and accidentally kicked a dog. And yet it wasn't seen as gross or unsanitary by the people living it. This was normal. Livestock were valuable, not just as resources, but as part of the family structure. You might name your pig. Your dog had jobs, guarding, herding, warming your feet. Chickens were rarely cuddled, but they earned their keep. Horses, if you were rich enough to have one, usually got their own space. But in winter, even they might end up in a shared stall beside the house to keep warm and safe from thieves. You shift your weight, trying not to disturb the animals still snoozing nearby. Your cloak is covered in fur, feathers, and something you hope is just old straw. Across the barn, someone else is waking up, groaning softly as they brush off their blanket. A child stirs nearby, curls tangled, eyes puffy. No one looks particularly well rested, but no one complains either. This is just how it is. Morning chores begin before the sun is fully up, feeding the animals who've just shared your sleeping space, sweeping out last night's messes, preparing another fire to keep the frost at bay. And this wasn't limited to peasants. Even wealthier households often shared space with animals, especially in winter. Manor homes might have separate stables or barns, but in bitter months, smaller animals were brought inside. Cats curled up on noblewomen's feet. Lapdogs lounged in beds. Ferrets were sometimes used to chase rats out of sleeping quarters. And yes, they might just crash there afterward. Sleep wasn't sanitized, it was symbiotic. One quirky historical record even mentions a woman who trained her goose to sleep beside her and honk if anyone approached. Is it true? Who knows? But it says something about the mindset. If it had breath and body heat, and could be trained not to defecate on the blanket, it was welcome in bed. There's still scholarly debate about whether this human-animal co-sleeping was born from affection or desperation. Probably both. On one hand, animals were tools, living technology to survive cold and danger. On the other, they were known, named and grieved when lost. Evidence of pet burials and religious blessings for animals showed that they weren't just warmth providers, they were companions. Sleep was just one more shared ritual in a life built on interdependence. And so, as you rub your eyes and try to stand without stepping on a tail, you feel a strange gratitude. You're cold, stiff, probably itchy, but you weren't alone. You didn't freeze. You might even have dreamed better, despite the chorus of barnyard noises. There's a comfort in the messiness of it, in the shared breath of species huddled together against the dark. You step outside into the morning air, the chill slicing through your cloak. Behind you, a chorus of snorts, clucks, and yawns signals the start of another day. You're tired, you're sore, but you're part of the world in a way that feels deeply, surprisingly right. Even if your pillow was a chicken, the sun is up, but barely. A dim orange smear along the horizon, just enough to paint the frost with gold and convince people it's time to be alive again. You're on the move, dusty boots, aching legs, and a half-eaten chunk of bread crumbling in your hand as you follow a wagon wheel trail through the edge of a noble estate. Fields stretch wide on both sides, dotted with workers bent over early chores, and ahead, rising above the trees like a medieval movie set, is the manor house. You're not invited, of course. But let's say hypothetically you manage to sneak inside, maybe as a servant, maybe as the visiting craftsman, maybe just as someone very good at pretending they belong. Either way, tonight you'll be sleeping in a noble's home, and it's going to be very different from anything you've experienced so far. For starters, everything smells better. Still smoky and vaguely sheepish, but now with notes of rosewater and sweet herbs. The rooms are bigger, the beds taller, and, miracle of miracles, there are actual sheets, linen even. Not soft by modern standards, but compared to straw sacks and goat-scented cloaks, you might as well be climbing into a luxury cloud. And at the centre of this elevated slumber experience, the noble bed. This is not a place for sleeping. Well, technically it is, but it's also a throne, a symbol, a statement. The bed is massive, raised off the ground, supported by intricately carved wooden legs, draped in thick curtains that hang from a canopy. The fabrics are dyed, possibly even embroidered. The mattress is stuffed with down feathers. The blanket is thick enough to crush you if it slips off the frame. It doesn't creak. It commands. You stare at it like it's a sacred object. It sort of is. In medieval noble households, the bed wasn't just where you slept, it was where you received guests, discussed politics, heard petitions, even posed for portraits. Entire court gatherings happened in bedrooms, with the lord or lady lounging on their enormous bed like a cat with a crown. It was performative comfort. "Look how rich I am," the bed said. "Even my dreams wear velvet." But even with all this grandeur, nobles didn't always sleep alone. Despite the curtains, despite the chambers, noble beds were often shared, with servants, children, or visiting relatives. It was less about privacy and more about hierarchy. Your presence in the lord's bed, or even just the room, said something about your status. Trusted servant? You get a cushion at the foot. Political ally. You might share the mattress. Sneaky jester. You probably sleep in the hallway. You get assigned a spot in the servants' chamber, adjacent to the lord's. It's less grand but still leagues better than a hayloft. A simple wooden bed, rope latticed and covered with a thin mattress. You settle in, still a bit stunned by how structured everything feels. For the first time, you're in a space that treats sleep like an art. And this brings us to the noble obsession with sleep routines and health. Unlike peasants who slept when they could, nobles had the luxury of bedtime rituals. Warming pans were slid between the sheets to take the chill out. Servants fluffed pillows, laid out nightgowns, and sometimes even read aloud or played music to lull their masters to sleep. A pre-bed snack might involve candied fennel or a bit of wine. And of course, prayers. Always prayers. No one wanted to die in their sleep unshriven, especially not someone with a title. You lie back and try to imagine that kind of life, where sleep is something you prepare for, not something that just happens because your body gives out. You picture noble women with braided hair uncoiled by candlelight, noblemen discussing dreams as if they were dispatches from another kingdom. Everything with ceremony, everything with a scent. But beneath the ritual is something even more interesting, a need to show off. Wealthy people use sleep to flex. Feather beds, imported linens, gold-threaded embroidery on the headboard. It wasn't about comfort so much as status. In a world where everything had to be visible to be real, even your mattress was part of your personal brand. And then there were the servants, dozens of them usually, pages, chambermaids, footmen, nursemaids, all working in careful silence to maintain the sleep ecosystem of one person. They slept nearby, often on narrow benches or folded up mats, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Did the fire go out? The dog bark? The Lord sneeze? Someone would be up instantly to tend to it. You glance at the servant sleeping near the hearth in your room, wrapped in a plain blanket, snoring so softly it's almost polite. You envy their ability to tune it all out. Because despite the fancy surroundings, you're still not totally relaxed. Something about the perfection of it all feels performative, staged, like you're expected to dream a certain way just because the mattress has embroidery. Still, it's warm, it's clean. The curtain across the chamber door blocks out most of the hallway noise, and the window has actual glass. Small wavy panes, but still. No wind, no bugs, no goat judging your life choices. Just the heavy weight of blankets, the scent of dried lavender tucked beneath the pillow, and the quiet creak of noble luxury settling into its own bones. You drift off slowly. Not all at once. You're too aware of how strange it is to be treated like your sleep matters. Like your rest isn't just survival, but part of a schedule. Something respected. Protected. You wonder, as your eyes slip closed, how different the world would be if everyone slept like a noble. If the structure and softness and silence were given to everybody, not just the ones with titles and wax-sealed names. Maybe we'd all dream bigger. Maybe we'd all be a little kinder. Or maybe we'd just get used to it and still wake up cranky. Either way, tonight you sleep with curtains, and that counts for something. Morning breaks with the kind of subtlety only a rooster can ruin. You're jostled awake not by light, not by the sweet scent of breakfast, but by a servant knocking on a wooden door and shouting something in French, or maybe just very angry English. Either way, you're up. You sit, rub your face, and take one last look at the noble's chamber. The velvet curtains, the feather mattress still shaped to your spine, the little dish of dried rose petals by the window. And then, it's over. You're on the road again, back to the real world where comfort is theoretical and sleep while travelling is more about endurance than rest. Travelling in the Middle Ages isn't a vacation. You're not galloping around in shining armour or bouncing along in a wagon with cup holders and snacks. You're walking a lot. And when you're done walking, you're still not done because now you have to figure out where to sleep. Inns are rare, expensive, and often full. Monasteries might take you in if you're polite and convincingly pious, but most of the time you're going to sleep wherever the road allows it. And that's usually in a ditch, under a tree, or on a rock that looks slightly less jagged than the others. Today's journey takes you along a trade route, rutted, muddy, barely a road by modern standards. You pass merchants with carts, pilgrims with staffs, and a group of men dragging a suspiciously coffin-shaped crate. You don't ask questions. The sun sinks quickly. You're miles from the next village, and it's getting colder by the minute. You look around, scan the hedges, and do what every medieval traveller eventually learns to do. Find a spot, pray it's not cursed, and make yourself small. You find a slight depression in the ground, a ditch carved by rain and time. Not exactly scenic, but it's sheltered from the wind. You settle in, using your cloak as padding and your satchel as a pillow. It's better than last night's bed, but only in the way that skipping lunch is better than food poisoning. Sleeping outside while travelling was so common that it hardly warranted comment in medieval records. Pilgrims, tinkers, soldiers and messengers all slept rough. Travelling meant exposure, to weather, to theft, to wolves. You had to be strategic, find a spot near a well-travelled path but not too close. Choose a hollow, but not one that floods. Sleep light, wake fast, keep your shoes on, and always, always protect your belongings. Thieves didn't wait for you to be unconscious. They waited for you to be mostly unconscious. If you were lucky, they just took your bread and coin. If you were unlucky, they took your shoes and left you with frostbite and a story no one believed. In fact, there were professional bands of sleep thieves, people who specialised in robbing travellers at rest. Some even claimed to have sleep powders to knock victims out more deeply. Probably just dirt and imagination, but the fear was real. To defend against this, travellers developed tricks. Some tied their bags to their bodies, others buried their coins under their bedding, which is fun until you roll over and stab your spine on a silver groat. A few used bells, literally tying them to their belongings. Jingle in the night. Time to swing wildly and hope for the best. You shift in your ditch, trying to ignore the creeping dampness under your hip. The night is loud in a way cities never are. Frogs croak, wind hisses through leaves, and somewhere, something with too many legs skitters nearby. It's not relaxing, but you're so exhausted that your body doesn't care. The cold, the risk, the crooked angle of your neck, it all fades as your eyes start to close. Of course, there were better travel accommodations if you had money. A decent inn offered a thatched roof, a fire, and possibly even a meal. But that didn't guarantee a bed. Most inns rented space, not furniture. You might sleep on the floor, on a bench, or with 6 strangers crammed into one mattress. Privacy cost extra, so did cleanliness. The fleas were usually complimentary. Churches and monasteries were more generous. Pilgrims with a credible destination, and preferably a badge to prove it, could sleep in guest quarters, often fed by the brothers or sisters who ran the place. But space was limited, and priority went to clergy, nobles, or people who looked particularly saintly. A scruffy traveller like you? You'd be lucky to get a spot near the stables. And then there were the stables themselves, a popular last resort. Warm if smelly, dry if you didn't mind horses breathing heavily in your direction. Stable hands might let you sleep on a pile of hay, but it came with risks, lice, rats, and the possibility of getting kicked if you rolled too close to a hoof. There are records of travellers curling up under carts, inside empty barrels, or even in the nooks of castle walls, anywhere that offered a bit of cover and the illusion of safety. Travellers' manuals. When they existed, sometimes included advice like, avoid bridges and sleep on high ground, which sounds like generic wisdom until you realise how many people drowned in their sleep because they parked themselves too close to a rising stream. You try to relax in your ditch, but your legs are twitching, and the dampness has soaked through your cloak. The moon rises, casting silver across the nearby field, and for a moment it's peaceful. You're connected to the land, to the journey, to 1,000 years of wanderers who slept exactly where you are now, hoping for uneventful dreams and nothing with teeth. Eventually sleep comes, not deep, not comfortable, but enough. Enough to let your brain do its medieval reset, to slip out of the aching world and into one where you're warm and safe and maybe back in the featherbed from 2 nights ago. You'll wake with dew in your boots, a sore back and possibly a beetle in your sock, but you'll also wake up in one piece. And out here, on the road, that's the win. You're indoors again, mercifully, though the room you're in smells suspiciously like wet wood and boiled onions. The walls are stone, the floor is dirt, and the ceiling seems to be shedding something. But there's a bench, a fire, and, praise be, a roof. You lean against a support beam, rubbing the stiffness out of your calves. Outside, bells toll. Not church bells this time, but something smaller, sharper, handbells maybe. A slow rhythmic clatter that signals something is about to begin. And then the voice starts, low, monotonous, deep enough to shake the soot from the rafters. You're in a church, or something very much like it, and someone is reading from scripture. It drones on like a lullaby, not because the words are soft, honestly the passage seems to be about eternal judgment, but because the rhythm is perfect. Sleep sneaks in through your ears and settles behind your eyes like fog. You blink slowly, lean your head back, and realise what you're about to experience is something medieval people took very seriously, the holy art of the nap. That's right. Despite the backbreaking work, the lack of mattresses, and the ever-present threat of being trampled by livestock, napping was a respected part of medieval life, especially when done in the right context. Like a church sermon long enough to make the saints roll over in their graves, you stifle a yawn but no one seems to notice. That's the beauty of it. In many towns and villages, daytime sleep wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Especially during certain parts of the day, like the after-dinner hour, when labourers took a break, monks withdrew to their cells, and entire households slowed to a sleepy shuffle. It wasn't lazy, it was practical. Sleep, after all, was a resource, one you couldn't always afford to use all at night, what with demons sitting on your chest and pigs walking across your face. Monasteries even had formalised nap times. The rule of St. Benedict allowed for a short rest after the midday meal, especially during the hotter months when fatigue and heat made labour unbearable. Monks might return to their cells for a brief doze or rest quietly in the cloister. The idea was that a rested monk was a more obedient monk, and also less likely to fall asleep face first into a manuscript during Vespers. But napping wasn't just for the holy one. Peasants napped too, often out of sheer necessity. After waking at dawn, working fields all morning and stuffing their bellies with bread and whatever root vegetable hadn't turned into a disappointment, they'd doze for a short stretch before returning to the fields. Field naps were common, lying under a tree, in the shade of a barn, or even inside the cart you were unloading. No pillows, no quiet, just you, your body, and 10 stolen minutes of peace before someone yelled about sheep again. You shift on the bench now, lulled by the voice still echoing off stone walls. You're not the only one drifting. Across the aisle, a woman is fully asleep, mouth slightly open, head nodding like she's listening to medieval jazz. A child slumped in his mother's lap is out cold. Even one of the robed monks has subtly tilted forward, his hand still holding the prayers book, but his eyelids doing the Lord's work. Of course, this behaviour wasn't always appreciated. Certain clergy were known to rail against sleeping during sermons, equating it to spiritual weakness or even demonic influence. There are written accounts from exasperated preachers begging their congregations to stay awake. One bishop in 13th century France was so furious about dozing villagers that he supposedly had a servant walk through the pews with a stick to poke the sleepy. It's unclear how well that worked, but it definitely wouldn't have helped your RM cycle. Still, the general attitude toward napping was surprisingly lenient, especially compared to modern standards. The idea of powering through the day on caffeine and spite didn't exist yet. If you were tired, you rested. If that meant falling asleep during a 3-hour recitation of Leviticus, so be it. There were no guilt-trippy productivity memes. Your boss wasn't timing your bathroom breaks. Your boss was probably asleep too. And let's not ignore the medicinal naps. Physicians often prescribed rest as a cure for everything from headaches to melancholy. Didn't matter if you were a knight or a miller. If you were sick, you were told to sleep. Not just at night, but throughout the day. In fact, one 14th century medical guide recommends lying in bed for as long as the body desires, when recovering from illness, which honestly sounds more progressive than most modern insurance policies. Even in legal documents, naps were occasionally referenced. There are court records describing disputes where a nap was central to someone's alibi. I was asleep in the barn at the time, or he stole my chicken while I was napping in the field. It was seen as a perfectly valid excuse, unless of course you were supposed to be guarding the gate or watching the baby. In that case, no nap for you. You slump a little further down the bench now, your spine becoming one with the wall behind you. The sermon continues, winding toward a point that may or may not ever arrive. Your head tips sideways, landing gently against a wooden beam, and you feel that wonderful liminal buzz where your thoughts stop being thoughts and start being dreams. You catch a vision of something, maybe a sheep, maybe an angel riding a sheep, hard to say. It's warm though, familiar, and in that soft, in-between place you understand something medieval people knew deep in their bones. Sleep isn't always about night. Sometimes it comes when the soul needs it most, in a field, in a pew, on a bench in a stone room while someone drones on about temptation and fish. When the voice finally stops and the room shuffles to its feet, you blink yourself awake and realise you've missed a solid 20 minutes. No one scolds you, no one even notices. You wipe the corner of your mouth, stretch, and rise with the others. The nap is over, the day resumes, and you feel better than you have in a week. It's night again, because of course it is, and this time you're in the middle of a village. Not just passing through, but staying the night in a modest wooden house squashed between two others, all of them clinging to the edge of a dirt road like they're hoping not to collapse. It's cosy in the way a barrel is cosy. Small, loud and extremely flammable. The fires burning low in the hearth, casting shaky shadows across the uneven walls. You're lying down, not on a mattress, but on something that resembles a thick mat of woven reeds. There's a blanket, if you're generous with the word. Someone's foot is too close to your face and standard. And just as you start to drift into that lovely head-sinking feeling of almost sleep, clang, clang, clang. A bell rings, loudly, repeatedly, no rhythm, no reason, just chaos. And then someone yells, then a dog, then another dog, then a baby. And before you know it, your sleepy little village is sounding like a tavern brawl scored by livestock. Welcome to the reality that medieval nights were not quiet. You'd think that before the invention of cars, streetlights and 3 a.m. karaoke machines, the world would have been peacefully silent after sundown. But no, nighttime in the Middle Ages was noisy. Persistently, wildly, nonsensically noisy. And you, dear traveller, have landed right in the middle of it. First, there are the bells. Church bells rang constantly, not just for services, but for the hour. The half hour, the end of the workday, the start of the watch, and any local emergency, real or imagined. Some towns had curfew bells warning residents to put out their lights and head inside. Others rang bells for fires, for deaths, for approaching strangers, or sometimes for no reason anyone could remember. It was ritual. It was reassurance. It was also maddening. Then there were the watchmen, town-appointed sentinels who patrolled the streets at night with lanterns, staves, and a commitment to yelling unnecessarily. Their job was to keep the peace, but peacekeeping, it turns out, often involved shouting the time every hour so people would know someone was still awake. 10 of the clock and all is well, they'd bellow, outside your window while you were mid-dream about eating grapes with a bishop. They might also shout warnings about fire, thieves, or suspicious persons, which was often just a guy walking too slowly. If you're lucky, the watchmen in your town are sober. If not, well, you get what you pay for. Some were notorious for sleeping through their own shifts or wandering off to drink. There are town records documenting watchmen being fined for snoring under archways or losing their lanterns in the river. One especially tragic soul was sad for consistently announcing the wrong time. Still, even the worst watchman could ruin your sleep by stomping past your door with a torch and a voice like a haunted cowbell. And that's just the official noise. The real party starts when you factor in the townsfolk themselves. Let's talk drunks. Taverns didn't close at a respectable hour. In some towns, they barely closed at all. People drank to forget, to celebrate, to get through the night, or because they had nothing better to do. And when they stumbled home, they did so loudly, singing, laughing, arguing, sometimes throwing up near doorways. This was just the ambience. In fact, in some places, it was expected that things would be loud until midnight. And if you complained, you were the weird one. Medieval noise tolerance was off the charts. Then there were animals. Every household had them, and many kept them close. Chickens clucked, dogs barked, pigs squealed at shadows, cows lowed for reasons known only to them. Cats shrieked like banshees at midnight just to keep you humble. There was no zoning, no animal control, no one telling your neighbour that maybe 5 roosters is too many for one street. And the people, they talked, they cooked late, they quarrelled, domestic fights spilled into the alleys, babies cried constantly. Not that they had their own rooms to cry in. You heard everything. And when someone died, wailing. That was a whole event. Loud mourning was culturally encouraged. Sometimes hired out if the family wasn't dramatic enough on their own. You roll over, trying to bury your ears under a bit of blanket that smells like a damp shoe. Somewhere nearby, a child starts crying. A dog answers, then the church bell again. You lie there, eyes open, marvelling at the sheer volume of medieval night. And yet no one else seems bothered. In fact, they're all asleep again within minutes. That's the secret, you realise. People didn't expect silence. They didn't demand 8 hours of pristine, monastic rest. They knew the night was alive, with footsteps, voices, clatter, and the occasional scream. They slept through it, around it, despite it. Their bodies adapted, their minds learned to filter. In some ways, it might have been easier than now. Modern people lie awake because a fridge hums. Medieval people slept through literal goats in the kitchen. There's even debate among historians about whether medieval people were better sleepers because of this. Some say yes, noise didn't disrupt them because it was normal. Others argue they just got used to fragmented sleep, waking often, shifting position, falling asleep again. The goal wasn't continuous rest. It was enough rest. The kind that let you swing an axe in the morning without cutting your own leg off. You sit up briefly, stretch your arms, and take a look around the room. Everyone else is still asleep, or pretending to be. One man snores like a broken windmill. A woman nearby mutters something in Latin and rolls over. Outside, the bell tolls again, 11 of the clock. All is still extremely unwell, but now, oddly, you feel calmer. The noise has become a kind of rhythm, familiar, unavoidable. Part of the night's strange personality. You lie back down, pull the blanket up again, and let your brain accept what your ears cannot change. Sleep comes not like a quiet lullaby, but like a surrender. You're not escaping the noise, you're sleeping inside it. And somehow that works. You wake up sore, again, but not in the usual medieval way. No straw poking your spine, no suspiciously wet draft on your feet. This time you're waking up on a stone stoop, halfway leaned against a wooden door that never opened. Your mouth is dry, your back is screaming, and your neck gone. Just a memory of what necks used to feel like. You shift, flinch, then squint up at the pale morning light creeping down the alley walls. This is what you get for sleeping on the street, not because you wanted to, but because you ran out of options. Maybe the inn was full, maybe you missed curfew, maybe you just ran out of coin. Whatever the reason, last night's bed was a corner of the world that didn't tell you to leave. And for a surprising number of medieval people, that was the standard. Because in a world before social safety nets and housing regulations, street sleep wasn't rare. It was a way of life. You sit up slowly, brushing dust and what might be pigeon feathers off your cloak. Around you, the town is already stirring. A man pushes a cart past, barely glancing at you. A woman dumps a bucket of something you don't want to identify into a gutter. Across the lane, another figure stirs from a doorway, stiff and slow, clearly another sleeper with no better place to go. No one's shocked, no one offers help, you're just part of the scenery. Medieval cities, especially larger ones like London, Paris or Florence, had entire classes of people who lived in public. Beggars, vagrants, itinerant workers, pilgrims and outlaws. Some were permanently homeless, others were transient, caught between jobs or journeys. For these people, sleep happened wherever it could. Stoops, church steps, market stalls, alleyways, under bridges, near city walls. If it was dry and marginally safer than being on the open road, it qualified as a bed. But sleeping in public came with risks. You're not just exposed to the elements, you're vulnerable to theft, harassment, and being forcibly removed. Many cities had ordinances against loitering, some more, especially after dark. Some had night patrols who would kick, beat, or arrest those caught sleeping on the streets. The goal wasn't to protect you, it was to clean up the view. Urban pride meant keeping the poor out of sight, especially in neighbourhoods where nobles or merchants lived. That didn't mean there were solutions, just more corners to be pushed into. You shift again, trying to stretch out your legs. They're stiff, and your hip bones feel bruised from the stone. You wonder how anyone survives sleeping like this every night. And the answer is, they didn't always. Street sleeping was hard, often deadly, and yet for many people it was the only option left. Some sleepers formed clusters, gathering in certain alleys or around marketplaces where watchmen were less aggressive. There was safety in numbers, at least until someone decided the group looked too threatening. In some cities, church porches became makeshift shelters. They offered cover from rain and were considered sacred spaces, which in theory meant you were less likely to be attacked there. In practice, mixed results. There are records of entire families sleeping under city gates or inside half-constructed buildings, trying to carve out just a little corner of security. People would guard their spots, returning to the same place each night, claiming it as unofficial territory. You could lose your sleeping space the same way you'd lose a rented room, by being too slow, too sick, or simply unlucky. Then there were the criminal elements. Some used sleeping as cover, pretending to be unconscious while watching for targets. Others preyed on real sleepers, stealing what little they had or worse. There's a documented case in 14th century London of a man who slept on a stoop and was stabbed in his sleep for the knife in his boot. The assailant was never caught. Just another casualty of a night without walls. And yet, there was a strange routine to it. Some street sleepers had systems, wrapping themselves in layers, sleeping with their backs to a wall, hiding valuables under their cloaks, even sleeping in shifts with a partner. If you were experienced, you knew which doors wouldn't open before dawn, which shopkeepers wouldn't mind if you left before sunrise, which alleyways had just enough trash to warm the air but not enough to attract rats. It wasn't safe, it wasn't easy, but it was possible. What's even stranger is how normalised it could become. In many towns, everyone knew who the regular sleepers were. Some were ignored. Some were helped, others were harassed, but no one was surprised. Poverty was visible, constant, not a failing, just a fact. The idea that every person deserved shelter, that was a future dream. For now, if you didn't have a bed, you had a wall. If you didn't have a blanket, you had your clothes. If you didn't have safety, you had sleep in spite of it. You lean your head back against the door and stare up at the morning sky. It's grey, not raining, which is something. You've survived the night. Your bones are sore, your cloak is damp, and you are probably going to smell like gutter until you find a stream. But you weren't robbed. You weren't dragged off. You weren't forgotten by the city because you were never really part of it. Some cities did try to help. Charitable orders might offer bread and shelter to the poor, especially during festivals or in plague years. Hospitals sometimes took in the destitute, but only if they were sick or dying. A few monasteries kept small rooms for the wandering poor, but space was limited. There were no government shelters, no guaranteed warm beds. Most relief was random, inconsistent and highly conditional. To sleep indoors, you had to be lucky, pious, or know the right priest. Even the laws around street sleeping were fuzzy. Vagrancy was criminalised in some places, but not consistently. There are records of people being fined for sleeping unlawfully in a doorway, and other records where the same behaviour was simply noted without consequence. As with much of medieval life, enforcement was unpredictable and often brutal. You stand up slowly, muscles complaining with every motion. You brush yourself off, adjust your cloak and start walking. The streets are awake now, vendors opening shutters, children chasing chickens, dogs barking just for the drama of it. You pass another sleeper still curled in the crook of a doorway and wonder if they'll wake before someone tells them to move. And as you walk, you carry something invisible, the knowledge that last night's bed was someone else's dream. That for too many people, then and now, safety and softness are luxury items, not birthrights. You slept in public because the world didn't make space for you, and yet you're still here, tired, cold, upright, and walking toward another uncertain night. It starts with a cough, a wet, rattling cough that doesn't sound like it belongs in any healthy human chest. You freeze mid-step. Someone behind you coughs again, and this time it's joined by another, shorter, sharper, and from a different voice. You glance around. It's a narrow street, damp from morning mist, the kind of place where sound bounces and lingers. The few people nearby are all doing the same thing, pausing, listening, breathing just a little less deeply. Because when a cough echoes down a medieval street, everyone's thinking the same thing, plague. And in plague season, which, yes, was very much a season, sleep takes on a new role. It becomes a prescription, a warning sign, a means of escape, or sometimes a symptom of the end. You're ushered into a house by a stranger who doesn't want you on the street anymore. Doors are shut, windows covered, the hearth is stoked higher than it needs to be. No one says the word, but it hangs in the air like smoke. You sit quietly in a corner and try not to look like a breathing liability. And while you wait, you start to remember that in medieval times, sleep was both healer and executioner. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, people slept more, not because they wanted to, but because illness demanded it. Sleep was recommended by physicians as a form of medicine. Rest the body, let it balance the humours, they'd say, and sleep when it came was deep, heavy, fevered, sometimes endless. Families watched over the sick as they slipped into longer and longer naps, hoping they'd wake with strength instead of silence. You adjust your cloak and glance at the others huddled in the room. No one's talking. A girl in the corner is already asleep or unconscious. It's hard to tell. Someone pours a bit of ale into a wooden cup, offers it without speaking. You take a sip, mostly because it feels like the kind of moment where polite refusal would break the tension. It's warm, flat, comforting in a strange way. Back then, medical knowledge was murky at best. Some believed the plague was caused by corrupted air, miasma, and so people stuffed herbs in their pillows, their blankets, their mouths if things got bad enough. Lavender, rosemary, wormwood, sleep under a garland of sage and hope for the best. Rich people slept with oranges filled with cloves pressed against their noses. Poor people, they just tried to sleep at all. If you couldn't afford medicine, you could at least rest. But rest wasn't always a good sign. A sudden need to sleep deeply and constantly could be seen as a symptom of infection. Parents watched children who dozed too easily. Husbands nudged wives awake more often, and if someone couldn't be woken, that was it. The house was marked, the bells would ring, and sleep would no longer be a reprieve, it would be a sentence. Whole households fell asleep and never woke up, and not peacefully. Plague was not gentle. There are records of people collapsing mid-meal, crawling into bed and dying within hours. Some tried to stay awake as long as they could, afraid that if they let themselves drift off, they'd never return. Others, resigned, climbed into bed, pulled a sheet over their faces, and waited. You pull your knees up, heart ticking a little too fast. You're probably fine. Probably. But you understand now why so many people saw sleep as something more than just rest. In plague season, sleep was ritualized. People cleaned their beds, said extra prayers before lying down, made peace with neighbours. There were even sleeping positions that were believed to offer better protection. On your right side to aid digestion, slightly propped up to keep the lungs clear, head facing east if you were spiritual, anything to improve your odds. Still, no one could escape the randomness. Royalty and beggars alike died in their sleep. Doctors, priests, midwives, all were vulnerable. You might go to bed healthy and wake up with a fever, or not wake up at all. In some towns, people refused to sleep indoors during outbreaks, believing the stagnant air of enclosed spaces hastened infection. Better to lie in the barn, they thought, or under a tree, or if desperate, to just walk until you couldn't anymore, collapsing wherever fate allowed. The fear bled into dreams too. People reported plague nightmares, visions of black dogs, skeletal angels, rivers of pus. Priests warned that some dreams were sent by demons to weaken your faith. Others believed their dreams were divine warnings. "Flee," a woman claimed the Virgin told her in a dream. She did. Her village was wiped out a week later. That story spread, grew, became legend. Maybe she survived. Maybe she didn't. But the dream lingered. Not surprisingly, sleep-related superstitions intensified during plague years. People buried their dead with charms tucked into their bedsheets, thinking the linen might carry evil. Others burned bedding altogether, believing disease clung to fabric like it had claws. Entire cities stank of burning straw, smoke rising from piles of infected mattresses, clothes, and anything too soft to sanitize. You lie down that night on a cot you don't trust, in a house full of strangers you're suddenly very fond of, and close your eyes to the creak of timbers and the faint, sickly breath of someone across the room. There's no talk of medicine, no physicians, just hot broth, a wet cloth, and the hope that tomorrow still exists. There's a strange clarity in that kind of sleep. It's not peaceful, it's just desperate. But it's honest. Your body rests not because it feels soapy, but because it can't fight anymore. And yet there's something beautiful in the way people still lay down, still curled up under blankets, still whispered prayers to saints, still kissed the cheeks of sleeping children as if all of it might matter. And maybe it did, because many survived, enough to bury the dead, to ring the bells, to clean the streets and open windows again, to dream again. You close your eyes, and in the darkness behind them, you feel something that doesn't quite feel like fear anymore. It feels like quiet. You wake up mid-step, not walking, sleepwalking. You're standing outside barefoot on the damp cobblestones, with no real memory of getting there. Your breath puffs visibly in the cold air, your cloak half slid off your shoulders, and your arms wrapped around your own chest like you're afraid of yourself. You turn slowly, confused, until a sharp whisper cuts the silence. Don't move. You freeze. It's not a guard. It's a neighbour, eyes wide, lips barely moving. She's standing in her doorway, her hand clenched tightly around a wooden cross. "Get back inside," she hisses, "before someone sees you." And now it hits you. Not the cold, not the embarrassment, the fear. Because it's the wrong century to be caught walking around at night with no memory of how or why, and worse, no shoes. In medieval Europe, that's not just strange, it's suspicious, it's evidence, of witchcraft. You rush back inside, heart pounding. Someone locks the door behind you. You lie down, fully awake now, fully aware of how fragile your reality just became. Because in the medieval world, your dreams weren't always private, your sleep wasn't always safe, and if your body wandered at night, that wasn't just a medical condition, it was a spiritual liability. Sleepwalking, now recognised as a parasomnia, a neurological quirk, was back then regarded as something far more dangerous, mysterious, and possibly demonic. People who moved in their sleep were suspected of being bewitched, possessed, or secretly practicing dark magic. And in a time when fear ruled the night, walking after dark without purpose could get you burned, you try to recall what you were dreaming. Something about water, or birds, maybe just the overwhelming urge to move. It didn't feel like evil, it didn't feel like anything, and that's the problem. Medieval Europe was a world that deeply distrusted the unexplained. If you couldn't explain it with saints or humours or sin, then it must be the devil. And the devil, as everyone knew, loved to show up at 2 a.m. There are actual court records from across Europe where sleepwalking was used as evidence in witch trials. Not always the main charge, but it was certainly part of the evidence stack. She walks at night, someone would testify, and that was that. No need for a confession. The community had seen you do something unnatural, and that was enough. Women were especially vulnerable. A man sleepwalking might be labelled drunk or eccentric. A woman? That was a gateway offence. Combine it with a sharp tongue or a suspicious number of cats, and you had the makings of a heretic. Some women confessed just to end the accusations, others denied it until the fire was lit. And in most cases, their crimes weren't crimes at all, just dreams, sleep, confused footsteps into walls that had no room for mystery. It wasn't just sleepwalking that made people nervous. Night terrors, mumbling in sleep, even sleep-talking could raise suspicions. She speaks in tongues, someone might say. He calls out to unseen spirits. If you'd had a rough night and screamed yourself awake, that might be chalked up to a demonic visitation or proof that you'd been doing something dark in your dreams. Forget sleep disorders. This was spiritual warfare. In some places, people slept with protective charms specifically to ward off nighttime danger. Not just demons, but wandering souls. Yes, some believe that during sleep your soul could leave your body, travelling into other realms, even into other people's homes. If you did this too often, you weren't dreaming, you were witch-riding, spiritually trespassing, possibly doing harm. And if someone suspected you of it, well, they'd be watching. The weirdest part? Sometimes the sleepwalkers believed it too. After being told again and again that your dreams were doors, your mind a battlefield, and your body a vessel, of course you'd believe it. People confessed to acts they had no memory of, convinced that they must have done them while their soul was somewhere else. They'd cry out in court, "I never meant to, I didn't know, I was asleep." But in a world governed by sin and suspicion, sleep was no alibi. You curl under your blanket, hands gripping the edges tightly like they'll hold you in place. You wonder how many people were condemned not for what they did, but for what their bodies might have done when no one was watching. Or worse, when everyone was. Of course, not every sleepwalker ended up in chains. Some towns were more forgiving, chalking it up to madness or a troubled liver. Local physicians might diagnose it as melancholy or a corrupted humour and recommend leeches or a change in diet. Some priests suggested sleeping on your left side, praying to St. Dymphna, or keeping iron under your bed to ground your soul. Others believed the sleepwalker simply needed to be watched, tethered, or smacked gently with a shoe at the right moment. There was no consistency, just folklore and fear dressed up as advice. Modern scholars debate how widespread the fear really was. Some argue that the most infamous sleep-related witch trials were exceptions, not the rule, that in most communities people knew better than to blame a confused old man for talking in his sleep. Others say the fear of nighttime behaviour ran much deeper than we admit, and that many of these anxieties were just never recorded, because everyone already agreed on them. Either way, the lesson is clear: in the Middle Ages, nighttime was not neutral. The line between sleep and sin was blurred. Your dreams could damn you, your footsteps could be fatal, and your body could become evidence against you even if you were unconscious. So tonight, as you finally settle into your mattress, or something approximating one, you make a decision. You'll tie a ribbon around your wrist and loop it around the bedpost. Not because you believe you'll float off into the darkness, but because you understand, at least a little, why someone once might have. Sleep feels less like rest now and more like surrender. You whisper a quick prayer, not for good dreams, just for invisibility. and then you close your eyes, hoping your feet stay put. The day was long, muddy, and full of people saying just a little farther when they really meant miles. You're bone-weary, the kind of tired where your legs feel like soaked wool and your thoughts keep glitching mid-sentence. But you've made it, this time to a monastery, tucked into a valley, like it's hiding from time itself. Stone walls, arched doors, smoke trailing gently from chimneys. There's a bell tower, silent for now, and a long gravel path leading you towards something holy, or at least double dry. A monk greets you at the gate, expression neutral, as though you're not a dirt-crusted traveller with a suspicious limp and eyes that haven't closed properly in 2 nights. He says little, just gestures, leads you through quiet corridors, past candlelit alcoves and into a small narrow room with a wooden bench, a basin of water and, blessedly, a cot. Thin, hard, but cleaner than most of the things you've slept on lately. You nod your thanks, the monk leaves. You're not just sleeping tonight. You're sleeping in the house of God. And believe it or not, that means there are rules. Monastic sleep wasn't a free-for-all. In fact, it was possibly the most structured, regulated, and intentional form of sleep in the entire medieval world. The monks, following strict religious orders like the rule of St. Benedict, had turned bedtime into a kind of spiritual discipline. You don't just crash here, you retreat. The first thing you notice is the silence. It's not just quiet, it's enforced quiet. No chatting, no sighing, definitely no snoring. Monks in many orders took vows of silence, or at least practiced what's called the Great Silence, which began at sundown and lasted until after morning prayers. That meant if Brother Lawrence kicked you in his sleep, he wasn't apologising until dawn, and the sleep itself? Segmented. Unlike the dreamy 8-hour block modern society pretends everyone gets, monks split their night into pieces. You might fall asleep around sundown, but you'd be up again in the middle of the night, called to prayer by the sound of a bell or chant echoing through stone corridors. This wasn't negotiable. It was matins, the night office, often held around 2 or 3 a.m. You rose in the dark, stumbled to the chapel, and joined your brothers in a long series of psalms and readings, sometimes for an hour. Then back to bed for a few more hours before Lord's at dawn. So yes, your night here is going to be interrupted, intentionally, repeatedly, and if you oversleep, they will know. Monks were trained to wake themselves naturally or had others quietly rouse them. You're just hoping they don't use the same stick the town watchman favoured. You lie down on the cot, exhaling slowly, trying to adjust your body to the wooden board pretending to be a mattress. It's surprisingly clean. The blanket smells like lavender. Not fancy noble lavender, but something dried and tucked in thoughtfully. This is sleeper's devotion. It's not about comfort, it's about humility, control, and yes, sometimes denial. The monks believed that too much sleep weakened the soul. It made you soft, indulgent, prone to sin. After all, how can you meditate on God when your brain is stuck in a dream about goats doing algebra? Better to sleep less. Sleep with intention. Wake with purpose. Some monks even voluntarily slept on the floor or used stones as pillows. Small acts of discomfort to keep them mindful of suffering and mortality. And yet, the sleep they did get was taken seriously. Monks had designated times, specific prayers, and shared dormitories called dormitoria, where each man had a simple bed, often separated by low partitions or curtains. No privacy, but a bit of space. They slept in their robes or in a designated night habit. No crawling into bed shirtless here. Modesty extended to dreams. You're drifting now, soothed by the stillness. The room seems to hold its breath. A single candle flickers near the door, casting long shadows against the wall. You feel safe, in a way that's unfamiliar. There are no pigs nearby, no roosters, no loud footsteps or drunken songs or people yelling about fire. Just this soft, serious quiet, like the building itself has closed its eyes. And then the bell rings. Not loudly, just a low, sonorous tone that rolls through the hall like thunder, trying not to wake anyone. You sit up, blinking, disoriented. A monk in the doorway beckons silently. You follow. Down long stone corridors lit only by torches and the moon outside, into the chapel, where other monks are already gathered. No one speaks. No one really moves except to bow or cross themselves. You find a place on a wooden bench, the chanting begins. It's in Latin, low and melodic, not meant to dazzle but to ground. You don't understand most of it, but it hums through your chest, and in this moment you realise they aren't just praying, they're transforming the act of waking into worship. It's not a rude interruption, it's a sacred rhythm. They're reminding themselves, and now you, that night doesn't belong to sleep alone. It belongs to reflection, discipline, and deliberate presence. Eventually the prayers end. You return to your cot. No one says goodnight. You don't need to. The silence is enough. You lie back down and wonder what it would be like to live your whole life like this. To have sleep woven into a sacred pattern, not as escape, not as luxury, but as a form of obedience. There's comfort in it, a strange, austere comfort. And as you close your eyes again, hours before sunrise, you feel something soft and surprising. Peace. Not comfort, not rest, but peace. The kind you find when everything has a place, even your dreams. You wake up before the bell this time, not because you're trying to impress the monks, though, let's be honest, you wouldn't mind earning a nod from Brother Stoneface, but because your body is starting to adapt. The rhythm of interrupted sleep, the simplicity of lying on hard boards, the silence that folds over you like a blanket, it's changing you. Your dreams are getting weirder. Your mind's quieter. Your body aches a little less every morning. You're becoming, in some absurd medieval way, a seasoned sleeper. After prayers, you're given a crust of bread and a warm broth, and then you're off again. Out of the monastery and back into the world, trudging toward the next roof, the next cot, the next approximation of comfort. And tonight it's something different entirely. Tonight, you're not sleeping as a noble, a peasant, a monk, or a traveller. Tonight, you're sleeping as a servant. Specifically, you're bedding down in the corner of a manor kitchen, your body tucked between a sack of onions and a lopsided crate full of pewter mugs. The floor is stone. Your bed is nothing. Just your cloak. The fire's still glowing from the hearth, but no one's bothered to bank it properly, so the warmth is quickly disappearing. You curl up, knees to chest, and hope no one needs more onions in the night. Servants in the Middle Ages didn't have bedrooms. Not unless they were extremely high up the hierarchy, like a personal lady-in-waiting or a favoured squire. The rest? They slept wherever the work stopped. Cooks dozed on benches, stable boys curled up in hay stalls, scullery maids collapsed under tables. If you were a castle servant, you might be assigned a spot in a hallway or the space behind a staircase. Sleeping in the kitchen, like you are now, was actually considered a lucky break. Proximity to the hearth meant fewer frostbite-related regrets. The term off hours was flexible at best. You didn't get a schedule, you got gaps, lulls, moments when no one needed you to scrub something, carry something, or stir a pot with a stick so long you could use it as a fishing pole. Sleep came in bursts, in bits, 10 minutes stolen by the fire, an hour while the bread rose. Occasionally, a full night if the master was out of town and the animals weren't feeling dramatic. And when you did sleep, it wasn't truly restful. You kept one ear open for footsteps, for shouts, for someone yelling your name in a tone that suggested panic or clumsiness. There was always a chance you'd be shaken awake by a noble demanding wine, or a steward looking for someone to blame for a missing spoon. Servants slept light. They had to. You shift in your corner, wincing as the cold from the stone floor creeps up your spine. Your cloak does nothing. The sack of onions makes a decent headrest if you're willing to smell like stew for the rest of the week. You pull your knees tighter, try to imagine a fire that's still burning, and press your eyes shut against the dark. If you're lucky, no one will need anything until dawn. If you're unlucky, you'll be up before midnight carrying buckets of water or helping restrain a goose that's decided today is its final stand. Some large households had servant dormitories, usually a cramped room in the attic or cellar, packed with straw pallets and so little airflow that simply breathing was a group activity. In wealthier castles, male and female servants were segregated, but in smaller homes, everyone just found a corner. Modesty took a backseat to survival. So did hygiene. Fleas were frequent roommates. Lice too. Beds weren't washed often. People weren't either. That didn't mean there was no pride. Many servants personalised their sleeping spaces, tucking small charms under their pillows, keeping tokens from home, or arranging their few possessions in a neat circle of territory. These touches were quiet rebellions, proof that you were still a person, even while sleeping between crates. Of course, no matter how loyal or hardworking a servant was, the lines were always clear. You were a body in service, not a guest. If the house filled up with visitors, your sleeping spot was the first to go. Your corner became someone's luggage storage. Your bench became a noble's resting place. You adjusted. You found a new floorboard to befriend. And let's not forget, you weren't sleeping alone. Kitchens were full of mice, basements full of spiders, barns full of things that squeaked, clucked, or occasionally stepped on you. If you worked in a manor with dogs or hawks, they might be quartered inside for the night. And if they were spoiled, which they usually were, they'd get the warm spot by the hearth, while you got the slightly warmer stone that had once been near the hearth. Still, servants managed. They bonded over shared fatigue, gossiped in whispers before collapsing into sleep. Some sang lullabies they barely remembered from childhood. Others counted breaths to fall asleep faster. A few just dropped wherever they stood, because there wasn't time to be picky. There's an ongoing debate among historians about servant sleep quality. Some argue that constant exhaustion made them excellent nappers, able to find rest anywhere. Others believe the stress, irregular hours, and constant threat of punishment made meaningful rest almost impossible. Probably both. Sleep was survival, not leisure. You didn't seek comfort. You sought recovery. You roll onto your side now, eyes half closed, listening to the house creak. You hear footsteps above you, soft, slippered. Someone's moving. Maybe a noble unable to sleep. Maybe another servant already prepping for tomorrow's chores. You hold still. You stay small. Maybe they won't see you in the shadow of the table leg. And then, nothing. Just silence again. You exhale. Your eyelids start to give. Your body does that little twitch that means you're crossing the threshold. You've earned this sleep. Even if it's brief. Even if you wake up sore and smelling like pantry. Because even here, even now, in a kitchen filled with ash and echoes and obligations, sleep comes. Like a small mercy, like a gift no one has time to appreciate. And you take it. This is it. The last night. Not that you knew it when the sun went down, or even when you curled up beneath a borrowed blanket on a floor that's definitely more dust than wood. It feels like just another chapter in your endless, odd medieval saga of makeshift sleeping arrangements. But something about the air tonight feels final. It's quiet, yes, but not empty, like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see if you've learned anything at all. You're lying in the corner of a common room inside a modest village home, tucked in beside 3 other travellers who, like you, wandered in late and offered coin or bread in exchange for a warm patch of floor. The fire is nearly out. 1 candle flickers in a glass jar, casting soft, honey-coloured light against the wall. Someone nearby is already snoring. Someone else is whispering to themselves. Maybe a prayer, maybe a dream they're trying to forget before it fades. This house belongs to a weaver. You saw her briefly when you arrived, hands calloused, apron smudged with dye, hair pinned in a way that says, "Haven't had time to sleep properly in 20 years. She offered no pleasantries, just pointed to the corner, handed you a blanket, and left the room. Her generosity is measured in square feet and boiled cabbage. You're grateful. But as you stare up at the low, sloping ceiling, your eyes adjusting to the flickering shadows, something strange happens. A kind of memory collage starts forming in your mind, not of your modern life, but of every bed, cot, bench, and muddy patch of earth you've claimed since falling into this time-warped fever dream of medieval sleep. You remember the hayloft with the goats, the manor bed with too many pillows, the stone stoop during plague season, the monastery's silent midnight prayers, the onion sack in the kitchen, and every moment in between, every night you clawed a few hours of rest from a world that didn't really care if you were rested at all. That's the thing that's become clearest to you in all of this. Sleep in the Middle Ages wasn't just sleep. It was survival. It was hierarchy. It was habit and hope and improvisation. It was an act of faith, in your body, in your God, in the fragile, flickering promise that morning would come. And the thing is, it did, over and over again. You roll onto your back and stare at the ceiling beams, noticing the tiny things you wouldn't have caught on day one, the way the smoke curls just so toward the window slit, or how the woven mat under your head is stuffed with reeds instead of straw, which means someone took care to collect them. You realise your body's no longer shocked by the cold, the noise, or the aches. You've adapted. Sleep has changed you. Or maybe you've changed to meet sleep where it lives in this world, closer to the edge, but still deeply human. Outside, an owl calls once. A dog barks in the distance, short and sharp, then falls quiet again. The house sighs around you, the kind of creaking and settling that only truly old wood makes. The sound of generations sinking into the walls, and as you lie there, warm enough or full enough, Sidwell or still alive, you think about something that almost feels too modern for this place, sleep hygiene. These days we obsess over blackout curtains, temperature control, memory foam and screen time. And yet here, in a world without clocks, where pillows are often shared and mattresses are filled with vermin or virtue depending on your social status, people still manage to fall asleep. They did it without electric blankets, without white noise machines, without ASMR whisperers or smart beds. They slept through wars, famine, festivals and plague. They shared beds with strangers, snored through sermons, and curled beside pigs. And somehow, they woke up. They worked, they dreamed, they lived. There's a quirky little medieval text, a medical manual from the 12th century that claims the best sleep comes to those who eat light, avoid excessive lust, and sleep on their right side. Is it science? Not quite. But even then, people were trying to optimize rest, to understand the strange theatre of the body when it goes dark for the night. Sleep wasn't something they took for granted. It was something they tried to understand, often clumsily, sometimes beautifully. Of course, not everything was poetic. You recall vividly the time you woke up with a chicken under your blanket, or the night your bed was technically a pile of wet laundry. You remember the overwhelming smell of peat smoke and wool, the feeling of dread in a plague house, the guilt of having a noble's mattress when someone else slept in dirt. Not all of it was fair. Not all of it made sense. But then again, when does sleep ever? You shift under the blanket, pressing your cheek against your folded arm. Someone across the room coughs softly, then goes still. A kettle creaks somewhere on the hearth. Your eyes are heavy, but this time they don't fight it. You're not trying to steal sleep anymore. You're receiving it. And in that quiet moment, liminal, unremarkable, you feel it. The strange, ancient, unshakable truth that has echoed across every village, manor, monastery and muddy field you've passed through. Sleep doesn't care who you are. It comes for kings as for beggars, for monks, for thieves. It finds you in silence, in song, in cold and comfort. It humbles you, heals you, hides you, and if you're lucky, it wakes you up, which somehow is the biggest miracle of all. You let out a long breath, one final exhale into this world of straw and shadow, and then, for one last time, you fall asleep. And now you're back, sort of, not in your own bed just yet, but floating somewhere just above it. That soft, dreamlike place between waking and sleep, where the memories of the past few nights still cling to you like old linen. You've walked through barns and abbeys, curled beneath castle ceilings and slept beside cook fires. You've dodged fleas, prayed through midnight bells and drifted off beside people who snored like medieval bagpipes. You've learnt the quiet truth that sleep in the Middle Ages was never just a pause. It was a mirror of your place in the world. In some corners of history, you were allowed to stretch and sigh, to sink into down-stuffed cushions, warmed bricks, and luxury silks. In others, you had to fight for a dry spot near a shuttered stall or steal minutes of rest between shifts. You saw how nobles flaunted their rest like a crown, how monks carved silence into sacred sleep, how the poor treated slumber, survival, a sacred defiance against cold stone and colder fate. And through it all, the weird habits followed you. Split-sleep communal beds, charms under pillows, onions for headrests, prayers muttered to saints who might have been too tired themselves to listen. Sleep was noisy, risky, strange, and somehow it worked. It carried them, and it's carried you too. So now, as you lie here in your own time, in your own bed, with clean sheets and maybe a fan humming softly in the background, let yourself feel that deep, strange comfort. You've travelled far, you've curled up in places you never imagined, you've survived sleep like only a medieval peasant with lower back pain and a chicken under one arm could. So close your eyes, you're safe, you're warm, and you've absolutely earned this dream.